So I'm looking at that color and I'm like, I showed it to my wife and I'm like, what does that remind you of? She's like, that is 100% the inside of a little kid's diaper smeared into concrete. I'm like, right? I'm like,
Welcome back to the Craftsman's Collective, a podcast designed to help the makers in the concrete, steel, and wood industries improve their businesses and lives by talking about tips we found along the way, talking about our common struggles, and of course, combining our unique perspectives to create even more spectacular pieces. My guest today is Simon Tippel. He and I have talked several times before, so we end up kind of going all over the place. What I've done to kind of offset that a little bit is increase the number of chapters that are in the show notes. That'll help you skip anything that you don't want to listen to and find the topics that are really important to you, whatever they may be. Simon is the owner-operator of Phoenix Concrete Works in Canada. He and I talk about colors, terrazzo, rapid set, a lot of different aspects of mindset and viewing things a little bit differently, as well as a whole range of things that are associated with setting the standard, being the front runner, different ways that he goes about doing that. As usual, if you're looking for anything particular, check the show notes for timestamps or anything that we mentioned throughout the episode. There will be affiliate links in the description, so if we mention anything that is particularly helpful to you, using those affiliate links would help quite a bit. We may receive a small commission, and that helps fund this channel. Thanks again, and I hope you enjoy the episode. The shortest one that I did, and that was like an hour and 15 minutes. But all the other ones were like 2 hours and 12 minutes. So you can imagine it takes that amount of time to record the episode, and then you have to go back and edit it. So that means you have to listen to 2 hours again. And so it gets pretty brutal because I got to write all my notes down and kind of parse everything out. And then go back through it again. It's gnarly. So that's definitely the downside to doing like a really long podcast, because I don't edit anything out unless there's like some legal stuff that we get into. There's like, I don't know if I was allowed to mention that,
yeah,
or if something happens later, they were like, I don't feel comfortable like how much I ended up divulging, because it's the dirty stuff that is the best stuff, and not dirty as in like gossip, but like when you like building a business, there's a lot of like rolling in the mud, right? And
oh, 100%.
that's not fun.
No,
But that's where the good stuff is, unfortunately.
yeah, yeah. Everybody's done something business wise that uh, is less than ideal. I know that you yourself, we've talked before. It's like I think I mean I commend you for doing a podcast because I think that's probably a little bit out of your comfort zone. Um,
100%.
but I
Like,
mean I think
I don't really enjoy doing it, to be honest.
what you and I talked last year, and I said to you, I was like, listen, Patrick, I'll come down and I'll sit with you at your shop in your studio. And if the cold calls is what bugs you, I mean, I'll come down and I'll spend a week at your shop and I'll make the phone calls. I'll make those connections for you, just so because you have some of the coolest pieces I've seen, in terms of getting the colors and everything right. Right. It's like, but getting out of your own way sometimes is the hard thing to do. Right. It is for a lot of
Mhm.
us. Right. It's like, there's the stuff that I do. I know I don't do it the best, but it's like, well, somebody's got to do it because I'm my business, you're your business. So I've got to get those things done. But cold calls and making the phone calls isn't one of the things I struggle with. I mean, if I'm down in your area, I'd be happy to come. You give me the list of 30 people and I'll phone them for you. We'll get them in touch with you and help you build your business. I got no problems doing that at all. I'll phone them from here. It don't really matter to me.
Yeah, I mean, Caleb and Martin have basically said the same thing. Not that they would call them for me, because I need to just get over it and do it myself. And but yeah, I mean, that's probably one of the main reasons why I'm actually doing the podcast. I'm doing it primarily for me so that I can get the answers that I want, and I'm asking a shit ton of questions along the way that, well, primarily I want answers to. And
Yeah.
then trying to get answers for other people too, because uh Caleb's episode ended up being, it felt more like an interrogation than a conversation. But it's just like, I have a feeling that I can see it going either way. I'm either going to regret being honest because I'm pretty sure it's going to be used against me. I'm very confident of that. Um, but at the same time, I want people to see, like, look, you can see these beautiful things that I put up on Instagram or in the forums and all that stuff, and it's great. Like,
Yeah.
whatever. I mean, they're cool. But I am about as fucked up in the head as you can get. And I'm trying. I'm trying very hard to dig myself out of this hole that I have now found myself in. Not because of anything currently, just because of life and some of the genetics and decisions that I have. I have. Um, so I'm yeah, I mean, that's probably the best way of putting it. Is it's probably going to bite me in the ass. Somebody's probably going to use it against me, but hopefully it helps someone. I think
Well,
we'll
I've
see.
heard before. One of the measures of success is if something bites you in the ass. If somebody comes up and say, "Hey, by the way, what you're doing is this way, or it's counterintuitive to what I'm doing, or whatever the case," that's oftentimes a measuring point of success, right? So when like we've done some stuff, like I've done some projects here in the past few months where they're monster projects, and it's like, and I've talked with a couple of people, and they're like, "Well, I wouldn't have done it that way." I'm like, "No, you wouldn't have done it." Because I mean, I'm doing, like, we did a countertop here about a month and a half ago. It was 17 and a half feet long with a 5 foot leg on the one side, and they're like, "Well, you shouldn't have done that in one piece." I'm like, "Yeah, but that's why
Why
they
not?
hired me and not you." I'm like, the reason why they wanted it is they wanted to have that one monolithic piece, and the challenges of getting a monolithic piece that way through the doorway was crazy. I mean, there was a time I'm like, okay, we were 2/3 of the way. I'm like, great, now the cart's wedged on the outside
Mm-hmm.
and on the inside. I'm like, we're stuck. Like we're stuck high centered. I don't know how we're going forward. I got no idea about going back, but we're stuck. And I'm like, this is kind of one of those things, right? So we ended up on that one. The way to get it done off of high center is we had one half of the cart was on the ramp, the other half the cart was in the house, and the cart itself was 19 feet. So we just lifted the ramp and blocked the ramp up so we would be unhigh centered. But I mean, the countertop, as you can imagine, like a 17 and a half foot countertop, isn't light, nor is lifting one side of it. It's like, all
Mm.
right, it's still got to go forward or still got to go backwards. But I mean, eventually we got it in. But I mean, that's the joys of having a business. But there were people like, no, no, you shouldn't do that. It's like, why not? Like I've seen talented people all over the world do it. Why is it different
Mm-hmm.
here in where I'm doing it? Why is it okay somewhere else? It's but what scares other people is what makes us successful, right?
Yeah, I mean, everybody seems to have a little bit of a different philosophy on like what they think concrete is, and it kind of, in a lot of cases, it seems to stem from that. Um, like, like one of the, well, again, like it depends on what your philosophy is, right? Like if part of my philosophy is concrete should be one piece, doesn't matter the size, it should be one piece, unless you just can't like get it up
Physically,
the stairs or something like that.
yeah,
Like that's a whole nother thing, but it should be one piece. And there are some people who they haven't assimilated that into their philosophy. And I do wonder why. I do wonder like why they haven't actually done that. Is it always fear? Is it usually fear? Uh I don't know. That'd be something interesting to know, right?
yeah. I think fear plays into it. I mean, I remember the first piece that I cast that was over 16 feet long. I'm like, This is going to
Mm-hmm.
be like, this is just massive. Like, this is like, how am I going to flip this over? How am I going to transport it? What am I going to do? If it breaks on row, like there were so many questions I had when I did that first one. And it's like, okay, I've dug the hole. I've climbed into it. I'm the guy that's got to get myself out. And I didn't worry about it too much. And how we transported the first one compared to how I transport stuff now, I found that the flipping it was uh, less scary than I made it out to be. Like the first one, I was like, okay, I got to flip this over. I've got to get a strong back on this one side. I've got to slide it over the edge. I got to clamp it down in 18 places to make sure that I don't flex too much. I got everything was like, I was being like so ginger with this piece because I was flipping it and it was like, it's 24 hours old. It's like, well, should I leave it a little longer in the position that it's in? And then, well, what about around the sink? What about around where the range is? Like I had all these things. Like, am I
Mm-hmm.
going to snap it? And now it's like, screw it. I'm just going to flip the sucker, and I'll be like, if it breaks, I'll cast it again. Fuck it. I'll see what happens. And if it cracks, that's on me. I'll just take my chances. And it's like I find I'm pushing the boundaries of what I was doing,
Mm-hmm.
and now I guarantee, I 100% guarantee I'm doing stuff that would make other people's stomachs turn when it comes to like flipping a piece over or whatever. It's like I know, like I've got a gantry, and I could flip like some of the bigger pieces with the gantry, and sometimes I'll
Mm-hmm.
phone my son up. It's like a 600-pound piece. I'm like, okay, you grab one side, I grab one side. We'll just shove and we'll flip this thing over. He's like, got it. So we'll flip the piece over. No gantry, no safety. It's like just get it done. But
Yeah.
it's one of those things. Like I know that those 500-pound pieces, or bigger pieces, they scare some people, and it's like, like what do I do? How do I flip that? How do I process that? How do I maneuver that? What do I do once it's flipped? How do I do anything? Right? It's there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, concrete can get heavy. Like when we're talking those bigger pieces, it can get spooky. But I've had less problems with the big pieces than the little itty bitty ones. Right? Like the little uh, smaller stuff, like the pots and stuff that you do. I have a terrible time um, getting the consistency I want from one batch to the next. Right? It's like I've
A
measured it
color or
down
a
to
consistency thing?
a consistency thing. Like I find that the smaller my batch, the from a weighing it and mixing it standpoint, I
Mm-hmm.
found like, okay, like I've weighed it out to 0.001 of a gram, and I'm not sure what my shop conditions are that have changed. I've mixed it what I think is the same, and then I'll do them, and one pot will have a whole bunch of bug holes, and the other one will be perfect. Like from batch to batch, like what did I
Mm-hmm.
do different? What's fundamentally different in what I've done that like the small batches are not the same as my big batches. And the only thing I
Mm-hmm.
can think is like, I don't know, maybe it's humidity, maybe it's temperature, maybe it's like the stuff that I'm not paying attention to. Like I don't
Yeah.
always pay attention to my water temperature or my mix temperature, especially on the small
Yeah.
batches. It's like I'm going to be
Mm-hmm.
done in 12 minutes. Is it going to matter too much? Um, but
Are you using Rapid Set or Portland?
a little bit of both. It depends on what. If I'm going to be in the pastels, then I'll use Portland. Like if I'm going to be in the if I want my
Mm-hmm.
colors to be brighter, then I'm going to stick to the Portlands. If it's going to be in the darker colors or even in the browns or the dark grays or any of that, then I'll use Rapid Set, or sometimes I'll use a combination of both, depending on you know just messing around with stuff and seeing what goes on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've always had a really good I've always had really good luck with the consistency of Rapid Set, but the color consistency is kind of hit or miss just because you don't have control over the percentages that they put in per bag. But um, the Portland is my conditions, I think, are maybe a little bit more stable here. Like we always have pretty much a stupid amount of humidity.
Yes.
Um, the temperature is always hot. Uh, but yeah, I don't know. Because the thing is, like, that's where we might be a little bit different is where, like, I just don't even care. As long as my color is close,
Hmm.
um, I'm good because the color consistency is the only thing that I care about.
Yeah.
Because I'm dunking the pots when I do the sealer, so I don't really have to worry about a lot of the other things. So like if somebody's like brushing it on, that's where I've found that problems kind of happen because the sealer just doesn't absorb the same.
No,
Um,
I follow that. Yeah. The way that we end up doing our pots, and the pots. I mean, I'm going to be honest. It's not our major point of the business. So sometimes I'll do a
yeah.
batch of them. Like a lot of our pots end up being, um, uh, if I'm doing a bag of something, I would I'll figure out my weights and measures to the nearest 50 pounds or the nearest 55 pounds, depending on which way I'm doing it. And then
Yep.
if I find out it's like, okay, it's going to be 51 pounds is what I need to cast something, I'm mixing 100 pounds. So I've got 49 pounds that's going into some
Hmm.
other mold, and then whatever. We've got enough molds, and I got to figure out what to do with them because I'm getting a huge, huge surplus of pots and other castings. I have no idea what I'm going to do with them. I'm just going to keep stockpiling them until I figure out what I want to do. That's like plan B. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'll probably take them to some home decor shows or whatever. I'll figure that out down the road. I'm not
Hmm.
worried about them today, but um, from my perspective, it's like, uh, especially if it's a bag mix or something that it's like, I just don't want to weigh out part bags.
Yeah.
Um, I just rather, and a lot of the times, like, I'll test color on the other excess, right? So it's like if if I had 2.5% of one color in there, I might add something else and write it down, and I'll weigh out to a certain amount and see what happens with my color. Because I mean,
Hmm.
people are okay if they get different color uh, things to that extent. But I mean, I commend you on what you do. Like, I don't know how many colors you have now. Looking at your shelf behind you, I'd say what, like 600.
Oh, can you see those? Oh, those are actually the samples that go to designers. Um, oh no, I'll send you a picture of the color wall now. I've got so many colors up. I actually have them sitting on the floor now.
Nice.
Color codes, I am probably up to 600, give or take.
Yeah, I figured you had to be close.
Yeah.
Um,
Um, yeah, most people don't know. I think you might have been a little bit after this happened, but when I got started, I was really discouraged about doing colors. I almost had a couple people that were starting. They started years before I did, so by the time I got in the scene, they already had several. They were like your seniors, right? Like
mhm.
they had clout and you kind of look up to them, and several people almost talked me out of doing colors. Really, really close.
You know, I've got a customer coming up that wants shades of green and going into teal for fluted tiles. They want like a very wide spectrum of green.
Hmm.
Uh, they want green and teal and brown, I think, in the consistency on the countertop, and they want a few different wild colors. And it's like, it's because we're not afraid to go, okay, like if you want to have something bold and if you want to have something different, yeah, I'll try and tackle it. It may be more expensive than if we're talking about like doing a charcoal gray. I said, but if I've got to figure out the colors, somebody's got to pay for that time, and I will
Hmm.
do my best to try and get it close, and then we'll figure out from there if it's close enough, or if I need to make three more samples or whatever, then just cover the cost of what it's going to cost me to do those things, and then we'll try and bat in that direction. But I find that the designers that I'm working with, um, a lot of them want to see more than just monotone colors. They want to see more than black and white. They want to see more than just the grays. They don't. They're not afraid to explore outside of earth tones and whatnot. And some of those colors, like the turquoise colors in Rapids, that I find is way more difficult for me, anyways, than to use a Portland blend, right? Or whatever the case is. So sometimes it's
Mm-hmm.
just a matter of playing with colors or figuring it out, right? So I don't know. I agree with what you said, though. I think a lot of people said like 90% of your business is going to be um, in the grays, and it's I'd say it's more 50%. I end up doing a lot of terrazzo like finishes because I did one terrazzo piece, and in my area, I've probably done more terrazzo than anybody else I know because we were successful in doing one piece. It's like if it's in your portfolio, you can do it.
Mm-hmm.
If it's not in your portfolio, then people are like, well, you say you can do it, but can you really do it? And it's those pieces that we've showed pictures of that's like, yeah, that's a terrazzo, that's what we like. Can you do it this color terrazzo? It's like, they're willing to go, okay, we'll buy that product and let me run with it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I get it. I mean, it's one of those things where um, and color theory isn't an easy thing, right? You all know, right?
Oh,
It's 1,000 mistakes sometimes to find what you're looking for.
I'm still
Um,
looking, and I'm 600 in.
yeah,
So
right. And
uh, take it for what it's worth.
well, certain colors just aren't easy, right? Uh, I haven't stumbled of easy ways of doing purple. Orange is kind of one of those things. I've had beautiful oranges kind of come out, and then they go uh, almost like a light creamsicle orange. Like after 2 months of sitting out, like that color fades quick, or at least it seems to be in my case. Like unless I'm not using the right pigments. I mean, there's so many variables.
Yeah, one of the things that I've done religiously when it comes to color is well, one, I track everything, um, and I only use Buddy Rhodes pigments, and it's not because I have anything against anyone else. Is that's what I learned on, that's what my codes are based on, and I'm not. eh, you don't really so they you could have somebody say, okay, what's a black oxide is a black oxide is a black oxide. Well, it's like I'm is it I'm
No,
not willing to risk it. You know what I'm saying? Especially when you start talking about like supers. Um, it's just there's too much riding on it. And like for the oranges that you mentioned, oranges and purples are interesting. Because you you eh, you have to be very specific on what kind of purple you're wanting. If you're wanting like a true purple, and you're using a good quality pigment, a true purple is going to be equal parts super red and super blue. Um, but when you start talking about, is this one more blue dominant? Is it more red dominant? Then things get real tricky real quick.
I agree.
Because that super red, if it starts getting, I don't know if it's an age thing or if it's a humidity thing, but as soon as super red starts to clump, you better use that super red quick because you're going to get all sorts of dispersion issues, and it's just all downhill from there, especially if you're trying to do oranges too, which you need the super red for. um, Oranges are really tough too. The vibrant ones, even if you're wanting like a blood orange, using like a red oxide and a yellow oxide, I think orange is probably the most fun to try and do, but it's really difficult. um, I'm trying to think off the top of my head. It's not a 2-to-1 yellow to red.
No, no, it's uh, geez, it's been a while since I played with the orange too.
Yeah.
I just know that it was more tricky than I expected it to be.
Yep.
Um, and then
Mm-hmm.
we're talking with the oxides, right? So I found that at least in my experimentation, if I used a blue and a red oxide, I got a nice chocolate color instead of a
Yep.
it's like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
that's nothing. That's not what I was expecting at all, right? It's like
Yep.
color theory says red and blue makes purple. No, it makes chocolate if it's an
Yep.
oxide, right? So I was like, oh, all
Mm-hmm.
right. And I kind of wonder in those systems of pigments, the pigments in themselves are supposed to be inert, but I mean, there has to be chemical reaction probably between some of those pigments between one another, right? So you might end up with something completely different. I have no idea. I mean, we're using it in low dosages, but I wouldn't put it past if you're using one oxide to the other, that there's not some small chemical reactions happening that alters color entirely. And then if you add heat to the mix, things change out again, right? Like I know I've talked with guys like Brett. Brett had a color years ago. He was doing a blue and it turned white. It's like, yeah, it happens.
Yeah. It was he was using super purple or super violet, one of the two. Yeah, and
Was
he
it?
covered
Yeah,
it, and it got
yeah,
so hot it bleached it.
yeah. And it sucks,
Yeah.
right? Because
Yeah.
you look at it in the pail and it's like that's exactly, I can picture, it's going to
Uh-huh.
be half as vibrant as that. It's exactly what I want to do, and then poof, it's gone, right? Um,
Mhm.
and that's actually one of the risks that you kind of take with at least with rapid set. You can get that scorching hot, right? I'm about
Mhm.
95% sure underneath the right circumstance I could cook a steak. I'm
Oh
100%
yeah.
positive. It's like I could, to a perfect medium rare. I'm sure I could get that steak exactly where I want it to. And I've actually thought about it. It's like, okay, I'll pour, say, 4 inches of a base. I'll lay a piece of poly down. I'll set my steak in there. I'll put another piece of poly down. I'll pour another 4 inches, and I'll mix in like black carbon black or something, like, because I've found that carbon black will really cook that sucker up. But I've had the heat gun on it, and it's like, hmm, we're at 163 on the surface. Like I'm at
Mhm.
163 Fahrenheit on the surface of my concrete, and at 147 I'm at medium rare. So I mean, it would have cooked it underneath that circumstance, but uh, I haven't tried yet because first of all, I don't want to necessarily waste $30 worth of concrete trying, and then I don't want
Yeah.
to screw up a steak.
Yeah. That doesn't seem worth it. the Yeah, I mean, oh man, rapid set gets hot. I was doing some pots and I was using carbon black and I something happened and the heat blankets got turned on
Ooh,
and I didn't put the gun on it, but it got so hot so quick that the bottom of the pot just like it just like you'd see like those pictures of the desert, just cracks,
yeah.
monster cracks in the bottom of it. And I wasn't paying attention and flipped the thing over and I couldn't get it off my hands quick enough. I burned my hand. It was so hot. It was
Hmm.
such a bad experience. So that will never happen again.
No, but it's one of those things. It's like and I've had a few castings in the business side of things where um deadlines happen, accidents happen, whatever the case is, and I
Hmm.
mean, I've I've pushed the limits of what I think you can do with. Well, actually, with both, I've done it with Portland. I've accelerated Portland. I've accelerated rapid set too. It's like these
Hmm.
are things you shouldn't do, and I wouldn't recommend doing them. It's like, okay, but I need to get something done in 12 hours. It's like, should I do it? No. Am I going to? Yeah.
Yeah.
Why not? It's
Let's
like,
see what happens.
let's see what happens, and like let's find out, right? Like it's one of those things. We had a builder here about a month and a half ago, and they phoned me up and said, "Yeah, we got our tiny home is going out on X day here. Yeah, things are moving along good." I'm like, "Guys, you told me at the beginning of the project that you wanted me to do the countertops in the kitchen." I'm like, "I was waiting for you to phone and let me know when I was going to be able to come in and template." And they're like, "We didn't schedule you." I'm like, like when is it going out? It's like it's going out on Tuesday. I'm like, guys, it's Saturday now. Like what? All right. So I'm like, I don't have any space to do any of the castings or anything like that. I ended up casting a countertop for them on late Sunday night, and I think I cast it around midnight, and I brought it for them at 7 in the morning that following morning, sealed, ready. It's like, there you guys go. I'm like, if it's not 100%, that's on you guys. Like, I've done a whole
Mm-hmm.
bunch of stuff I shouldn't have, and I said, I don't know what the longevity or what the, like what's going to go on, but like, there was no safety net. There was just pour, go, polish, process, whatever I need to do in the amount of time. But when their window is gone, the window is gone. It's like, that's the way it works. But I made them promise me, like, we're not doing that one again. Now I'm gonna. I was like,
Yeah,
you
we'll
guys
see.
can give me a, yeah. Um, but I mean, you live and you learn, right? So, can
Some
you
people
make
do.
a countertop? Yeah, yeah. Can you make a countertop in 7 hours? Yeah. Can you make one in 3 hours? Maybe. And I don't know what the I don't know what
Well,
the
I'm not
limitations are.
volunteering for that one. You let me know how that goes.
Depending on how complex. I mean, you could do it. Should you do it? Probably not. Um, but I mean, business is business sometimes, and sometimes schedules and deadlines are king, right? So.
Yeah, that seems to be that's it's almost like there are a few contradictories that happen in our industry that really bug the hell out of me. Um, and one of them is they'll say like I'm an artist, right?
Hmm.
Like I'm like, for one, there's no artistic expression in any of the things that you just showed me, but let's just put that aside and say, okay, let's say that you are an artist. If you are an artist, why are you so wrapped around deadlines? Artists don't do that. Artists are like, this is how long it takes me to make the thing, you're paying me, and you'll get it when it's done. But you never hear that side of things, right? The other side is always, oh, we've got all these deadlines, we've got to get it done, I've got to rush it through this thing. It's like, I mean, which one are you? Because you know what I'm saying? And I would like to see the two sides maybe meet in the middle a little bit more,
And
you
that's
know?
fair. I mean, if you're talking about other industries, for example, if you take an author, let's use an author for example. I've read a
Mm-hmm.
couple of books, and I know that the authors that I read, there's been a couple of times where it's like, okay, I know that based on the cycle of books coming out, that they have to have a book done every 6 or 8 months. So like they've got an 8 month deadline. And like you said, it's an artist thing. If you've got to come up with character development, you've got to come up with a plot line, you've got to whatever. 8 months might not be enough depending on what you're trying to do. Maybe some
Mm-hmm.
stuff gets rushed, maybe some stuff gets omitted, but it's like that where art and deadlines. I mean, I think that there's a compromise in what needs to be met, and maybe sometimes it's a matter of fixing it the next go round and learning from it. So um, it's one of those things, right? Like I agree. There's probably a little bit of a balance. So on a lot of our customers, right? It's a lot of the ones like the builders, especially builders, have no patience. So
Yeah, I've heard.
those ones are like, okay, are getting a mantle in, getting a counter in, getting whatever in on those ones. Somebody else is dependent on me getting our job done so that the next trade can start.
Mm-hmm.
So, do I have to get the countertops in before tile? Do I have to get something in so they can close up a wall? All sorts of different scenarios. Um, is a crane coming on a day, and that's the day that the crane has to lift all the big pieces in. Um,
Mm-hmm.
there's a things, those factors and whatever, they kind of play into it. But depending on those things, um, is there art to it? Sometimes not. Sometimes all the artwork is kind of in how you put the forms together.
Mm-hmm.
There's much more interesting things going in on the forming side of things than on the actual piece
Oh
itself,
yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know how many times I've underestimated hydraulic pressure. Every time. Like, I think every clamp I have plus one seems to be the rule on pours. I'm like, all right, no, I bought 10 more clamps. Then get to the next pour, it's like I should have bought 12. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
but um, that's again, like how you live and learn. Um,
I wonder if part of the deadline issue is because there's a lot of stuff that happens if the person's making, like, if you're a shop that makes uh countertops, wall panels, backsplashes, like that type of thing, you're there's usually a whole bunch of trades that have happened before you, and they are notorious, like like things usually happen with like flat work, or something happens with like the cabinetry, and something has, or the plumber, something gets wrong there, and that kind of, it's like each person that before you, it slowly inches you a little bit closer to the project deadline,
mhm.
and then by the time it gets to us, there's substantially less time left than what they originally budgeted for. So we have to get in there and get our thing done quickly so that you can have like boom, 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 boom with the guys that are
Yeah,
left. And I wonder if that's kind of what pushes that side of what we do a little bit harder.
it,
Like maybe that's why we can't be like, sorry, it takes us 2 months to make a piece, or 3 months, or whatever it may be.
um, that was the whole month of March this year for me. I got into, I think I did 400 square feet of terrazzo. And terrazzo itself, to polish out and process that much terrazzo, 400 square feet in a month is a lot. Like, that's a big 400 square feet of terrazzo in a month that's a lot of processing. And underneath normal circumstances, a month is like, that's a hard push. So we talked with them. I'm like, okay, um, when can I get in and start templating it? And at the beginning, it's like, no, you'll have like 6 to 8 weeks. So I'm like, okay, well, 6 to 8 weeks, I can live with those deadlines. And then XYZ got pushed back, cabinet stuff got pushed back, plumbing stuff got pushed back, and
Mm-hmm.
so it came to the time of like, I could go in and template, and then they're like, by the way, we're going to need 7 of these countertops by the end of the week. I'm like, you told me I had 6 to 8 weeks. I'm like, you had delays and whatever. I'm like, why didn't my timeline increase with whatever? Like, if you had a 4 week delay, where's my extra 4 weeks? And it's like, well, we can't afford to give it to you. And part of this particular project, uh, it was basically a government mandated deadline. The project had to be so far along in order for them to secure government granting to cover the cost of the
Mm-hmm.
project. So it's like, in the month of March, I think I worked just just north of 540 hours for the month. I was like, okay, this is beyond stupid. I mean, I would go and my sleep schedule was like, okay, I'll sleep from midnight to 2, then I'll get up and I'll go and work at the shop, and I'll flip these pieces and I'll start processing these. And while those ones are grouting, I'll batch up these pieces and form those ones. And then
Mm.
when the grout's set on those ones, I'll polish that off, and then I'll do whatever, um, and screw trying to wet polish it. It's like I'm going to dry grind off what I can, and I'll wear a mask for it. It's like it's because like the abrasives on the dry grinding were 3 times more aggressive than wet polishing.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, and then I'll fix it in post processing. It's like, and away we went. Right? It's like I did so many stupid things in order to meet those deadlines. We hit everyone. I managed to get every single one done, and then we went in and they managed to get their funding. They managed to get everything else. And the guys that dropped the ball was I had all of the kitchens. I had part of a reception area. I hit every one of our deadlines, and the guys that dropped the ball at the end was the bathrooms on that one were supposed to be quartz countertops. Not a single one of those quartz countertops managed to make it in, and they have their slabs pre-made, right? They got to cut a hole out and mount a sink to it. Not one of those guys got theirs in, but what they ended up doing was they went to, I believe, Home Depot, and they bought pre-made rolled over countertops, and they
Mm-hmm.
cut the sink in and they set those in there, and they put them in temporarily so that the granite guys could catch up. I'm like, dudes, you guys screwed me on deadlines. You screwed me on timelines. If the quartz guys were allowed to have these
Mm-hmm.
roll top to just get the ground, like, why wasn't I? I mean, mine is like everything started off as bags of raw ingredients. These guys had the stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why did you guys give those guys grace and I got none? I'm like, that's kind of a messed up system you guys got going on there. And like, we came through. Like, what's the deal, right? And I didn't get any answers from that, but I wasn't none too happy because I'm like, we hit our deadlines because, like I said, that that particular company was relying on government grants, and I wasn't going to be the cause of why they couldn't get something, right? So you soldier on.
Yeah. I don't know, because that's an interesting one. Because of the timelines with getting the grants, that really complicates that
Yeah, yeah,
quite a bit for somebody. But at the same time, you took a lot more ownership of that problem than
most would.
they deserved.
Well, by far, right? We did all sorts of, like I said, ridiculous things. That's where I found out, like, with the right ratios of ingredients, I can turn a piece into a polishable Portland-based terrazzo in 7 hours. I can start grinding it at 7 hours. Like, should you? No, don't do that. It's not a. I don't
Yeah,
recommend it. Grinding it dry. Definitely don't do that. Right?
yeah.
It's. But in order to meet deadlines, it's like, well, and I mean, I guess it's a good thing that I work on my own because uh, OSHA would have had a field day, right? Like, I just shoved the piece outside at 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm up in Canada, right? So it was -15 out. I've got the piece outside. I'm grinding. It's blowing dust on everything outside, right? There's no filtration. It's like I've got uh, the safety squint on full, right? Like, just squint and grind it out, right? I got a mask that's mostly doing what it's supposed to. Um, two shops down from me is uh, is the tow truck company, and I set their alarms off at like 4 o'clock in the
Oh
morning
man.
because there's like they've got. I set up such a plume of dust in the back of my shop that the dust set off the motion detectors
Oh my god.
2 doors down, and like the tow truck driver came over. It's like, yeah, he says you set the alarm off at like 3:30 in the morning. He said, I'm like, what the fuck is Simon doing now? Like, what are you doing? Like, he's like, it looks like it's smoke on the screen. He says, I was tempted to drive by. He said, but like, I seeing all this smoke on the screen, but you're not running and I don't see fire. I can't figure out what's going on. he's like, he's like, what are you doing? Right. He's like,
Little this,
but
little that.
it's like, don't worry about it.
Just don't report
He's
right.
got, he's got he's got cars that are in the impound lot, like, because I'm like 2 doors down, they're covered in concrete dust. I'm like, oops.
You give it a
It's
good,
like,
just bring the
oh,
blower
whatever.
out there and just blow them off. They'll be good.
He's
Oh.
like, yeah. He's like, yeah. I'm like, I promise I won't do it again too soon because I'm like, I can't say never. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but that's deadlines, right? Like, sometimes you just do what you got to do.
Yeah, the thing that I want to talk about that, but I don't have the experience to kind of push back on certain things, right? Because we talked at the beginning about not having a whole bunch of designers that I've worked with and all. So like, I don't know, but I am curious. Like, let's say that somebody that doesn't have like that the government situation that they were in for needing the grants, like if they say like, we need it by Thursday and it's Monday and you haven't started on it yet, just because like you don't have templates or whatever, and then you're just like, sorry, it's not getting done by then. Like, what are they gonna do,
Depending,
right?
yeah,
You know?
depending on, like, we've had a couple of very interesting. I end up working with some very interesting people, and I've gotten to in some very interesting situations. A lot of those situations are, for better or worse, they're COVID related. Um,
Mm,
like this whole system with the grants and stuff, that was all COVID related. Uh, the government would come in and they were like, okay, there's a mandated shutdown. You guys can't work because like somebody tested positive, so you got to
mm-hmm,
shut this area down. And they shut this, and it's the government that mandated the shutdowns, but it's also the same government that put the deadline on when stuff had to be done. I'm like, well, you can't
mm,
have both sides. Like if you're going to mandate a shutdown, then mandate the extension, right? Like
mm-hmm.
it's a weird situation, but it's like, you know, uh, at the end of the day, there's only 24 hours in every day. Um, it's like there's only so much that can be done, and like when everybody pushed through, it's like. Uh, in a pushing through, it's lucky more people didn't get sick. I mean, there was, I would go in and I would do an install at 3 o'clock in the morning on the job site, and you'd think at 3 o'clock in the morning on a government site that I'd be the only guy there, and that wasn't always the case. I'm like, I'm in there and there's guys putting on wall panels and stuff that are in areas of there, and they're like, hey, like, funny to see you here at 3 in the morning. I'm like, yeah, funny to see you guys here. It's like, well, that's like, it's like when stuff's got to be done. It was the only time that stuff could get done in order to meet those deadlines, and it's like, um, uh, whatever. But again, what you're saying about those, what are they going to say? Uh, you're right. Like, what can they say other than please? Can you make that deadline? It's like, no. Sometimes, and on some of those ones, it's like, no. Like 3 days, it's not realistic. Have I done it in the past? Yeah. Have you done any favors for me?
mm-hmm.
Because like if I'm doing you a favor, if I'm doing you a solid, and I'm getting it, there's got to be a return. If I'm not getting a favor in return, then that's just taking from me, right? Like it's a two-way street. Like
Mm-hmm.
if I do a favor for you, I expect some point down the road that there's going to be a favor I can call in. Otherwise, it's not mutual, and then there's no point, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
whatever that might be. So if like I'll use that tiny home builder. Like we did it overnight and we got everything in. Um, with that particular builder, I believe next year I'm going to have 36 tiny houses I've got to work on. Well, that's my bread and butter for the year without having to go and find 4, 5, 6 other clients to fill that in.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, do the deadlines suck? Yeah. Is the payoff worth it over the course of a 2, 3, 4, 5 year period? Uh, like, is it going to get better? Yeah, it's going to get better. Is it going to be worth it? Probably. So it's just balancing out whether the deadlines are worth it, I guess.
Yeah,
Um,
I think that's the hardest. That's really difficult though. Like, because like if you have somebody who has shown themselves to be a good partner, right? Like
yeah.
every once in a while, like, yes, I will bend over backwards. Like we're partners in this. Um, but the thing I wonder is like if you have 20, 30, 40 different designers and builders and architects that you're working with, you could get a long string where everybody's just wanting just a little bit more from you, and then you turn around, there's nothing left for you, right? Like,
Oh, we hit that wall. I hit
yeah.
that wall so hard. This week, uh, Tuesday. Yeah, today's Sunday, so
Mm-hmm.
Tuesday. Tuesday is the first theoretical day where I will have the entire day without having to look at the screen, without having to go to the shop without having to process, without having to flip, without having to batch, without having to do anything since Christmas. That'll be the first actual full day off for me. And there's been at some point in time, it doesn't matter. I've taken part days off, but never a full day off since Christmas. It hasn't been in the cards. It's been go go go. I just delivered a countertop here 2 days ago, and at the end of that work day, if you can call it the work day or whatever, that was 39 hours straight of pushing, because the next batch of stuff has to go, right? Like, there's just, it's just the way things work out. And if I have any mistakes, which I've had more than my share of failed molds, failed pieces where something's gone wrong and I've had to recast.
Mm-hmm.
I don't budget for those for the timeline, right? So it's like, if I,
Uh-huh.
I expect to have success. So when you pour that sink or whatever, it's like, okay, I've done everything right, and then uh, there's a problem with the mold or whatever. It's like, it's not the way that it was supposed to be. I'll recast a piece, or a big one for me this year is I did on I did a 900 pound island, and we brought it, and 2 miles away from where it had to go,
Mm-hmm.
I hit a pothole, and it snapped the waterfall leg on the 900 pound piece off. I'm like, I drove to the site. I showed them. I'm like, they're like, what are you going to do? I'm like, I'm going to turn around. I'm going to drive home, and I'm going to redo it. And then I'll be back in a week. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
and in that week, I recast that one, and I poured everybody else's without stopping. Like I had to do that on top of whatever, right? And then drive it in on pins and needles again. Remember where the pothole was on the road that screwed it up the first time, drive around that, and then
Mm-hmm.
get it delivered, right? So, um,
So is that more like I don't know if you could put a percentage on it, but is that more bad luck, the string from like December till now, or is that or is that poor planning? You know, because there's it's got to be a percentage of both, right? Because like something breaking, like with the
it,
pothole, like that's purely like bad luck.
mm-hmm.
And then sometimes we just screw ourselves, which is sucks. Um, but looking back, like what like
Percentage bad luck versus bad planning.
yeah.
Let's go with I had an enormous string of bad luck
Mm-hmm.
that compounded into bad planning.
Mm.
So the bad luck of the countertop snapping, that whatever, that compounded into working longer than I should have on other projects. So like, not longer than I should have, working longer than I should have in a day. So
Mm-hmm.
when you're putting an 18, 19 hour day in, that's bad planning. But like, the
Mm-hmm.
bad luck is the reason why I'm putting in the 19-hour day.
Right.
So then you start making micro mistakes, and micro mistakes, it's like the death of a thousand cuts,
Yeah.
right? Like, it's like, okay, I'm going to do this, and yeah, you know what? I'm going to skip putting a brace here or whatever. Like, it should hold, or whatever the case. Or in some of my cases, it's like, okay, now I'm going to reuse a chunk of melamine one more time than I should have, because I don't physically have the time to leave the shop and go and pick up that extra set of supplies. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be on the backside. It'll be okay. It'll be just fine. No, that's not the case. And it's like, is that mismanagement? Probably. Like, but again, I don't know if it's bad in Florida, but like in certain points in this year, melamine has been just garbage. you could get maybe, I would say some of that would be 60% I would get okay for casting, and
Mm-hmm.
40% I would have the melamine surface start to delaminate with my concrete. Like the bonding on the melamine was garbage because there was just a sub quality of melamine coming in. There wasn't a good quality of what I was expecting to to cast over. And then some of those pieces I ended up using twice, which ensured a failure. But it's like, okay, well, it's like, is it going to matter? No, because I'm going to be polishing it off to a terrazzo finish, so I can just grind it off. But it's like, uh, the flatter the surface I start with when I got to do my
Mm-hmm.
polishing, the better my results. So, if you get a orange peely surface because it leached funny, it's just more work for me in the end, right?
Yeah.
So, uh, no, I don't know. I think that the percentage wise is probably at least 50% bad planning and 20% bad luck, and then everything else is where it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
Um,
Where was some of the poor planning? Because I know you were talking about like how little sleep you were getting. Is like, was your uh, what is the word for it? Were you compromised? You know what I'm saying? Like you would have probably never made some of those decisions had you gotten like a full night's sleep, whatever that means for you. You know what I'm saying? Because like we're typically people are willing to cut corners and maybe kind of shoot from the hip a little bit when they're running on less sleep. At least that's what I've found for me.
on the sleep front,
Yeah.
I can work on surprisingly little sleep. I've been doing it for most of my adult life, where uh, I function rather surprisingly well on 3 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Like on a 3 hour sleep, like I don't I do fine. Um, the mistakes that I end up making end up being mostly from uh, materials perspective. Uh, this year in particular has been really challenging finding quality materials for us in order to do what I do. Right, like when you know that there's a high probability that the melamine you're going to use is going to have a failure, but there isn't a plan B. Like there's nothing like I
Mm-hmm.
can't. Melamine. Uh, from our perspective, it's an essential, right? Like I need it for building the sides, building the walls. Like I've looked for alternatives. I haven't found any alternatives um, that work, right? Like PVC isn't an option, right? PVC is 4 times the cost of melamine, and I don't know that it's going to perform uh, the same way because I don't work with it enough.
Yeah, it's
So
well, it's you'd have a tough time on your rails and all with that, depending on how wide they are, tall they are. Yeah.
but it's one of those things. It's like and it's like, and I know why those shortages are there. It's in our area we're in a bit of a boom, so the cabinet shops are buying up,
Mm-hmm.
lifts and lifts and lifts of melamine, and that's not even enough to cover their back orders. It's starting to balance out, and the quality's starting to come back, but um, customers don't care about quality. The customers don't care about setbacks. They don't care about shop setbacks.
Oh yeah,
They
no.
don't care why. It's not like that's that's a purely Simon problem at the shop. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
well, I don't care how you get it done, just get it done, right? And they don't care, like, but like the same shortage that I'm short is affecting the cabinet guy, right? So the cabinet guy, he's 2 weeks too late
Mm-hmm.
because he couldn't get those same pieces of melamine that I needed. So he's 2 weeks too late, and then my deadline doesn't get to change. When I go to template, I was supposed to have 4 weeks. Now I have 2 weeks
Mm-hmm.
because when I make the agreement to do things, uh, it's like the customer will give me a deposit. It's like like from templating, I got an X amount of YZ, but the deadlines, there's only so much that can be stretched too, right? So uh, yeah, it's just growing pains, uh, business wise. I'm sure like other guys will say different. You know, a lot of guys won't put up with those kind of things that I'll put up with in our business, but it's like um, par for the course for me. It's not. I've worked with deadlines so long. I don't necessarily worry too much about them, and along with the misery comes the successes, right? So uh, you
Yeah.
know, when you finally get it in and you talk with the customer when everything is done, it's like, well, you were one of the better things that happened on this build, and that was more than what our expectation was when we went into it. It's like you far and away exceeded the expectations. We'll work with you again on another project. Then it becomes kind of worth it uh, with the right customers, right? Some
Yeah.
some customers are just Karens,
Hmm.
and nobody likes to work with those ones, no matter what.
Yeah. The general consensus from the people that I've talked to so far has been, in a lot of cases, that where even though you can find some every once in a while that it was worth the additional headache or time lost or whatever category those types of things would fall into, is there's too many people that either um, where it didn't move the needle with them, or they just outright didn't care. They were just kind of dicks to begin with. And so
Yeah.
the good ones just don't offset it. So what's the point? So it's been interesting to see where people fall on that continuum of where some people, like, they say, if it takes me 4 to 6 weeks to make the piece, like, it doesn't matter who screwed up before me, it still takes me 4 to 6 weeks to make the piece, and you can just deal with it.
Hmm.
And then you've got some people like you that they will, like, no, we'll make it work. Um, but I think that's good because there are people who fall into all these different categories and then some in between them. And it's good to see that somebody else uh, that is running a shop is doing it differently, because if everybody was doing it the same and then you were doing it a little bit differently, then you'd be like, well, what's wrong with me?
I find one of the things that I do fundamentally different from just about everybody else. When I got into it, I trained underneath Jeff and Lane, right? Like I went out and I
Hmm.
took the course with Jeff, and I went with Brett over in London, Ontario, and I took the training. And I said to my wife at the time, like this would be 2019. I'm like, if I'm going in and I'm going to do something in an industry, then in 5 years, I want to be a name that's recognizable within the industry. Like, I don't want to be, uh, I don't like to settle for mediocre, right? Like, I want to push the boundaries to the point where it's like, when I do something and if I share it on a social media or if I put it out there, that somebody can go, oh, I know who did that. I can, you know, I want
Hmm.
to be that person in a couple of years' time where somebody just starting out, like we were talking at the beginning, right? There's guys that are have been in the industry so long, you know, those are recognizable names.
Hmm.
They've made their contribution to the industry. It's like, uh, uh, I'll use you as an example, right? Like if we're talking color, uh, I know of nobody who is your peer. Like in your category of knowing what you're doing for color, I think you are completely peerless. I don't think that there's somebody who has done more than you, right? It's like, so when I'm doing it, it's like, if I'm getting colors right or getting colors wrong, it's like, well, Patrick's probably already got that color. I could ask you, but I won't. My stubbornness is like, okay, I'm going to figure that out. If I do get 100% stumped, I'll ask for a hint or whatever the case is. But
Hmm.
I want to get to that point where, um,
Not everyone
uh,
has your level of grace. Let's just put it that way.
but you know, I want to be one of I want to be part of the 1% of the 1%, right? Like I
Hmm.
want to be at that level because that's where I set my personal expectations of what I do. Not in everything, right? Like, but if for as far as work goes, I want to be the upper echelon of what I'm doing. Otherwise, I just don't think it's worth my time in that respect because that's
I can
the
see that.
the challenge that I set to. That's where I set my bar. I
Mm-hmm.
want to set my bar at like as far as things go. When in my area, like I know there's a couple of great guys that work in our area, uh, and but if you set the bar, then and you raise the bar, then everybody else in my area has to work to that same level.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, they're in trouble, right? So by setting the bar and setting the example and setting the course and showing people what can be done, at the end of the day, I'm the guy who holds the cards,
Yeah.
if that makes sense, right? So while
Mm-hmm.
the other shops might be starting to slow down or struggle, I'm still ridiculous busy.
Yeah.
But by setting the bar or setting the example, I control the game, right? I would rather lose sleep and control that part of things than go at the end of the month like, well, this is going to be another instant noodle and macaroni month because I don't have the money to put in to have a decent meal or whatever. Like I would rather the other way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so putting in the extra effort, I don't know how much extra effort is too much because I don't know who else to compare to. Uh,
Yeah.
like I don't know, um, like I don't know how many hours anybody else puts in. So
Right.
I work under the assumption everybody works as hard as me, which I don't think they do.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but got to start somewhere, I suppose. So just do it different.
Yeah. Um, one of the things I've always been trying to figure out is where I think I'm trying a good way to phrase this. I can't remember the guy that runs. It's a design Instagram account. The account is the future, and I can't for the life of me remember the guy's name that runs it. But he talks about something similar to that too, where um, you're the front runner and people are chasing you. And there's a whole bunch of different ways that you can do that, right? You can have a very unique style. You can work more than everybody else. You can market yourself a little bit different. There's a bunch of different ways to do it. And there are going to be people that copy you to various uh, levels, right? So some people will just completely rip off your stuff. Some people will take a little bit of it. Um, and depending on what that is, you should fight back a little bit, like call them out or things like that, or cease and desist if it gets really crazy. But the thing that he brings up that I think is just genius is he's like, if you're constantly, because you're the only combination of your things on this planet,
Right.
uh, and if you're constantly moving forward, the best that they can do is just keep copying you. That is
Yeah.
literally the best that they can do. Um, and I don't know how that really manifests itself in our industry, though. I get the design side of it because some of the pieces or finishes that I do are so much different than what I see other people doing. But you still have the other side of things that I know so little about, and I don't know how the two reconcile with each other. So like we were talking earlier with like deadlines and your uniqueness, and those two things can be very at odds with one another. uh you know what I'm saying? Like trying to reconcile those two things is something that I'm having a really difficult time with.
Yeah, I think I follow what you're saying. That uh, I mean, I guess if anything, I guess I'd be a genius of hard work.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's one of those. That's where um, the only like for me to get to your level of for to in doing colors, for example. Like I said, I don't know you're pure in that area. In order to do that, the only way to get to where you did is to put in the hours. There's no other way, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
no uh, and then I don't know of any other way to get there than through hard work. Um, one of the things that I personally believe is if it's not in your portfolio, you can't do it. So if I tell somebody that I can make a concrete tub, you and I both know that I could probably make a concrete tub,
Mm-hmm.
but until I have a photo of a tub that I've made,
Mm-hmm.
I can't do it. It's one of those chicken before the egg kind of scenarios, right?
Yeah.
Like the only way to do it is to physically prove that you can do something for a person, sometimes just in order to get that done. And that's where the only way that I know of doing it is through uh, brute force, right? There's this the only way to get to some of those points. And in my business model, like the faster that I can get those things done and get them in my portfolio, then I mean, if I've got to be sleepless and I've got to work stupid hours and do stupid things to get there, then that's the cross that I've got to bear to get there. Because if I spin my wheels and I keep churning out the same rectangles week after week,
Mm-hmm.
I don't, is it a good business model? Yeah. There's people that are successful at it. Yeah. Is there an artisan side to it that I like? No. Like we've talked about that numerous times. Like
Yeah.
none of those things are artisty things. But in order to get to those artisty things, I need to have the stability of a paycheck so I can work on the lines that I want to work on. Like I've got a couple of coffee tables and a couple of chairs and a couple of benches and things that are going to be unique to my style that I want to bring to market. But I have to have capital, and I've got to have a space, and I've got to have time to develop those things where the pressure's off, right? To do that, and the only way to do that is to make sacrifices somewhere, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I think that's how the reconciliation kind of happens for those two areas. Is if I can generate enough income that income I don't have to go and chase it, then I can pursue the other side. If I can't do that in a reasonable amount of time, and I sit there spinning my wheels, I don't want to be there in 2027, 5 years from now, going, geez, if I would have just put the remote for the TV away and not watched another episode of whatever, I
Mm-hmm.
could have had that line and got it done, right? So uh, I think Martin's the one that says it the most often, right? Like success is only rented. You got to, and rent is due every day. That's
Yeah, that's
kind of how you kind of
up on my wall.
right.
Yep.
Um, so the success comes at doing those things, and sometimes I think maybe I have a superhero complex about meeting the deadlines, right? Like if I, well, maybe not a superhero, but maybe like the old Star Trek, where I don't know if you're familiar with it, right? Like where Captain Kirk's calling down to the engine room, like, Scotty, I need more power. It's like I'm giving it all she's got, right? Like the guy that comes in at the end of the job, because like most often we're the last few trades that are in,
Mm-hmm.
in the build or whatever the case is, right? Like to meet that deadline, and then not just meet the deadline, exceed the customer's expectations of what happened at the end of it all, is kind of a natural high. Getting it out there, getting it done, burning, like I said, 39 hours the other day, and coming up and talking with the customers and not telling them, like, hey, I was up at 3 a.m. while everybody else was asleep, and I was getting this part of your project done and getting it in, and it's like, wow, we had no idea that this was what concrete could be, and then like again, setting the bar at that stage, and making people go, wow, I had no idea that you could get that done, and blowing people's minds at that point, to me sometimes is worth the sleeplessness or whatever that aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, because if you take a look, it's like, well, who else could achieve that? Who else was willing to put in the extra? And it's a very short list
Yeah.
in trades.
Yeah. One of the things I'll bring this up just so that uh, someone who doesn't fall into the same capabilities of running on so little sleep that like you do. Um, I'm on the complete other side, right? Like I have to get, and this might be a little bit crazy for some people, I have to get as close to 9 hours of sleep a night as possible, or shit starts to go downhill.
Hmm.
Um, so I'm on the other end of the spectrum where I have to make sure, since I am needing to do that to make sure that my quality of work and we'll say mental fortitude stays at the level that it needs to stay at. I've got like I have to protect that very, very carefully. But the flip side of that is that means that when I am awake, I've got to make sure that I'm not wasting time. Like the same thing that you were talking
Absolutely.
about just earlier is like I really wish I had put that remote down. Like that's
Yeah.
I've been doing a lot of reading here recently of like productivity and like getting rid of a bunch of the distractions and how to handle that and everything. And I've really starting to get like a uh, it's not a schedule, but it's just some frameworks involved that is starting to work really, really well. And of course, everything is still trying to get that stupid new saw set up. So the shop is still in just like complete crazy town right now.
Well, I'm
Uh,
going to talk about that for 1 second. I am completely envious of that new SawStop you got. That is a 100% on my list of things to buy.
mm-hmm,
When it's like it's not the first or whatever. Like I've got a few other purchases that I've got to make in between. There are times where, well, in April, I managed to cut the tip of my thumb pretty brutally, and it's like had I had that saw stop,
mm-hmm,
I would have been able to work April without one hand tied behind my back. Literally,
mm-hmm.
like it's like when you're trying to do stuff and you don't have your thumb on one of your hands
Yeah.
and do what we do. It's like this sucks.
Oh, I
Um,
do need that digit.
yeah, it's like but it's not just the digit, right? Like when you've got stitches in your hand and whatever, it's like it's your whole hand, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
for grip strength, it's like well, and she's like, how strong can I
Mm-hmm.
actually grip something this way? It's
Walk
like
around monkey gripping things.
and I have a pretty mean grip, but it's like uh it's one of those things. Like I am jealous of you of having a great saw. Like good for you. I think that's probably as far as purchases go in a concrete shop, one of the best purchases you can make is having a high quality table saw.
Mm-hmm.
Your formwork comes out better. Everything else that you do down the line comes out better. I have actually a very high quality table saw. I am missing the aspect of the saw stop,
Mm-hmm.
um, but I had to make that decision on balance. Right? It's like saw stop is upwards of in my area 5, 6, $10,000 depending on which model and which
Mm-hmm.
accessories you get on it. Right? Like if you decide to get the rails that are for feeding and outfeed tables,
Yep.
uh, you know that's a very expensive. And what I wanted on the other side is I wanted to have that balanced out and make sure I have a decent mixer. So I had to balance things out, and I chose the like I said, I've got a used professional saw. So I've got a 3 horsepower motor on the saw. It's
Mm-hmm.
more than enough to do all of the work that we're doing. It lacks one safety feature from your saw. Other than that, it's the power and performance is going to be the same. But one slip, and if I would have cut any deeper, that would have been worth a lot more than $5,000, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's that's the way that it is. But um, no, I mean, I like you made the right call. If you're one of those that finds your mind wandering while you're working, that's a good tool to have.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Like there's a list of things that I just have to guard very carefully. I'm very like I just got done a couple of days ago sitting down with Brent. He's up in Canada with you, and
yeah,
not that Canada is like a really small place, whatever. he's
he's
he's right next to you.
he is he's exactly 13 hours from me.
Yeah.
Like he's like what I would consider a day trip away.
Yeah.
I could make it over to Chilliwack and I could sit down and I could go fishing with Brent in 13 hours.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I just got done talking with him and I don't even remember why I just brought that up, but he it's like he is so calm. He's just like we did joke around by every once in a while there'll be a Home Depot bucket that just goes flying out the door and maybe a few expletives follow it, but um I really am envious of guys like that. Like you have like a very calm uh like shit kind of happens. It is what it is kind of
yeah,
demeanor. And I like you may envy me getting a SawStop, but that's an easy purchase relatively speaking. Like I can't go out and
it
buy
is.
that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You can't buy that level of patience, and I get it, right? Like it's and that is something that is earned with time, um, and it's what's the best way to describe that? Like, well, I'll go back to that one where I had that 900 pound island that I had to deliver, and I snapped the waterfall leg off. Like, you know how much work is
Yep.
involved in creating something like that.
Oh yeah.
And I
The
come to the
form work
customer's
alone, yeah.
house, right? I go to the customer's house. I'm like, yeah, it's like that sucks. I
Hmm.
point to it on the trailer, and they're like, really? Like, I thought you'd be more mad. I'm like, there's nothing I can do on earth that's going to make that pothole or that accident go away.
Hmm.
So the best thing I can do is go, that sucks, and carry on.
Yeah.
And not even like, I don't even know that I lost any sleep other than the actual sleep I needed to get the work done, right?
Yeah.
Like it didn't, when uh, on the way back from where I was, like I stopped off at the local coffee shop. I got myself a coffee. I drove home and I just started rebuilding the form. About 8 days later, or no, not even that. About 6 days later, I'm looking at the form, or sorry, not looking at the form. I'm looking at the island as it's still strapped to my trailer in the same broken pieces as it was. I'm like, you know, 6 days ago, I had a plan for how to get it off. There was a big crane just going to take it off, and the cart was going to. I don't know how to remove 800 or 900 like of broken concrete. Like half of it's laying on the deck of the trail. I'm like, I have no idea how I'm going to get that off. I got nothing, right? Like the best I can do is like, uh, we figured out. I figured out how to fire up the forklift, and I think I drove the trailer in reverse and slammed on the brakes till it slid off.
Whew.
It's like not ideal, but yeah, like I get it. And Brent is like easygoing, like, but Brent
Hmm.
works underneath those same weird time constraints for different reasons, right? Like Brent works under those time constraints in his shop because he plays Jenga like nobody's business,
Oh
right?
my
Like,
god. It's like
um,
a labyrinth of concrete pieces.
like the if I was to be envious of him for that, right? Like, I don't think you could beat somebody like Brent in a game of Jenga, right? Like shop Jenga
Hmm.
is totally a real thing within his world, right? And it's like stack this piece here, move that piece there, and do it in an order so that you know how it's going to go up. And that's a patience level that kind of gets built along with it, right? So
Hmm.
um, I totally get where Brent is coming from on those things, and one day I'll make it over to Chilliwack and I'll stop in his shop and drag him out. We'll go fishing for the day because he is on the best river in Canada to go fishing. 100%. Like,
Yeah, I mean, some of the things that he talked about, like he's very different from you from like a schedule. Well, he kind of jokes about how terrible he is at planning things, but like he does these like little mini vacations where he and the
yeah,
wife or he and the kids will go off ever like 3 or 4 times a year for a long weekend or the weekend and no phones and everything like that's kind of how he recharges. And but he's very adamant what does not work on Saturdays and Sundays. I
yeah.
think he said he does it every once in a while, but it's very, very rare. Uh, But he works like
But
a
along,
dog Monday through Friday.
yeah, and I will say, along with that, not working Saturdays and Sundays that Brent does, right? I know fully that he's been up at the same 3 a.m.
Yeah.
hour of the morning casting when I'm casting, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
I'll take a look at Messenger. It's like Brent was active like 30 seconds ago. It's
Yep.
like, oh, somebody else is up, right? Like,
Oh yeah.
and I know that duration that he's on Messenger, or if he's on wherever, it's like, yeah, the reason he's on at that hour is because he's sitting for something to kick so that he can get to the next part of his casting, right? Like it's, and whatever that might be, just checking mail, checking messages, whatever. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, he's working 100%. Right? There's no downtime on those hours.
Yeah. It's really been good seeing how everybody handles the like the scheduling and taking time off and seeing just how different people are and figuring out like what can you assimilate into your life, like what can you just leave by the roadside. um so it's been really good because like you have a really stark contrast here between like how you approach things and like how I approach things. I don't have much of a choice. Like I
No,
just have to have certain things in order for things to go right because I can't. Well, any shop like those projects that work their way to like the Boneyard, right? Like those can cost you a lot of time and money. And if you can kind of put like Cody Sandoval talks about systems a lot. Like he uses a lot of systems to make sure that things don't go to the boneyard or the graveyard or whatever people want to call it. And then you have some people where they make sure that we leave at this time every single day and we check out, and that's how we keep things from going to the like. But I guess the fundamental thing is like you have to find out what that thing or those things are for you, and that can be tricky just by itself. um
it is. I mean, but like talking about earlier on of that first time flipping a 16-foot piece, right? Like I was so ginger with that, like how we
mm-hmm,
flipped it, how we whatever, to the point of where I'm at now. Like I said, I mean, I'll phone my son up. It's like, hey, meet me down at the shop. We're going to flip this 500-pound chunk, and there'll
mm-hmm.
just be the two of us, and we'll just walk it up onto the table, flip it over onto some foam blocks, and he'll leave like 10 minutes later. But it's one of those. If you don't push to find out where your boundaries are, you'll
Mm-hmm.
never know, right? If you always sit in the comfort zone, then you never know where you don't something you getting in your own head and getting in your own way is something everybody struggles with, right? Like to a certain extent.
Mm-hmm.
Um, my comfort zone in working the way I work in the stupid hours I put in and whatever, and I know they're stupid because any rational person looking in would be like, "You're an idiot working the hours that I do." But it's something that I got through years and years of working in different industries, different jobs, and knowing where my boundaries are and where I'm comfortable with. So
Mm-hmm.
they don't phase me the same as like what like if you I don't know if you ever put in a 24-hour day
Mm-hmm.
consecutive, um, but you probably how you get through that at the end of the day is probably different than how I do, right? Like
A lot of
I
caffeine.
will I'll just at the end of one of those work days, uh, I might only stop for 20 or 30 minutes and straight back and right into the next day, and not let it phase me. But it's one of those things. Like I think it's uh, what way would we kind of word that? But I mean, there was a point in life where those hours weren't comfortable, right? Like I just got to that point. Um, not that I would recommend it for anybody. I wouldn't. Working that the amount of hours that I do is stupid.
Yeah, I don't know if you've ever heard of Andrew Huberman. Um, he's a neuroscientist. He runs the podcast Huberman Lab. I think all creatives and makers should listen to that podcast just because I think everybody that does what we do or makes things in general or creates things in general needs to be mindful of like science, just because
Yeah.
from a physiological standpoint you can leverage those things much better, or from a technological side you can leverage those types of things better. But one of the things that he talked about here recently, I think it was on Jocko's podcast, where it's like 12% of males have this genetic, I think it's technically a deformation where they can go on substantially less sleep, like what you're talking about, like 2, 3, 4, 5 hours, and they'll be fine. They can do it for a day, 2 days in a row. It's still better to get more sleep, but they can handle that in stride better. So it'd be interesting to see if you have that genetic anomaly.
I
I do not.
I yeah. I have another anomaly that plays to my advantage that I haven't met very many people in my lifetime that are able to do what I do. Um, I've got the we'll call it an ability, I guess, is if I'm working on a project, every once in a while you'll get into a project and something will stump you, whatever that might be. Like how I'm going to form something so that it's going to demold, or how am I going to build it so that I can have uh, everything fit together, or how am I going to brace things. Like there's certain things that, and I'm just using concrete, but I mean I do it in all aspects of life in that respect. Like how am I going to get something done, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I will go to bed with that thought in mind,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like what have I got to get done? And I will wake up at 4 or 5 hours later, and I'll write the answer down, and I will have dreamt up the solution to that, which in a sense is like working through the day, because then I will go to the shop and rework exactly what I dreamt up. And then it's like deja vu. It's like I've already
Mm-hmm.
done this because I dreamt how I was going to do it, and I've solved that problem, and I work, but that's even in that aspect. I feel like I get less sleep, but dreaming the solution and then being able to write it down the following morning. I don't know a lot of people who do that at all.
Oh no, I absolutely love that. Yeah, like I think the more like macho somebody is, the less likely they are to. I say that sarcastically, just in case anybody didn't get that. The uh, is using the subconscious. Like you need to put the subconscious to work, and it's
Yeah,
amazing how. And there's a whole bunch of different ways that you can do that. Like I have a journal or a notebook that goes in the shower. It's waterproof. You can write on it with a pen or a pencil, and I just take a hot shower for 10 or 15 minutes. I have a rain shower head, and I just sit there and meditate for 15 minutes, and anything that pops up, I write it down. And then you just go back to meditating again, and I'll have a full page worth of stuff that I've just kind of bubbled up to the surface, capture that, and then I can work on it later. Um,
yeah, yeah.
it works amazingly well, and I wish people who don't use it would start using it, and people who don't even know that it's a thing start playing around with it. It's really it's brilliant, um, because you can be working on two things at one time, right? Your conscious mind can be working on whatever they're in front of you, and every once in a while, just remind your subconscious to be working on whatever that problem is. And so it's like you working on two things at the same time.
Yeah, yeah, and that's like, and but I think that that's something that is inherent in creatives. So the
Mm-hmm.
more creative you are, and I think that that's one thing. I gotta think. Chase Jarvis. I think I told you to listen to a couple of Chase Jarvis podcasts a little while ago. He's a photographer,
Yep.
but he said along the lines of creativity. The more creativity you use,
Mm-hmm.
the more you have.
Yep.
So in that aspect, like that's exactly what we're talking about, and that's where the artisan and everything kind of comes out, right? Is the more creative you are, and um, and like I said, sometimes the artwork that you do isn't necessarily seen by the customer. Sometimes it's what the process of how you got to where you go, right? Some of your designs and stuff that I've seen that you've done, the creative process was on the other side. You get a beautiful piece, but the creative side to get to that
Mm-hmm.
and try different things, that's where the key was, right? It's uh, not the end of the project, it's the during project that's the creative part, right? So
Yeah, if you just anybody who doesn't know that who Chase Jarvis is, he runs Creative Live. You really should check out the podcast. He's got a lot of really good stuff on there for creatives, not just like photographers and anything. There's a lot of really good stuff on there. It's a really good podcast. If you can handle when he gets a little too frou-frou. He gets a little too mushy for me sometimes.
sometimes, yeah, yeah,
uh,
sometimes it's, but yeah, he's an excellent resource.
mm-hmm.
And I again, to back up what you said, right? Like that's why I mentioned to him early on, like a couple of years ago to you, like creative processes is he's a good resource for that. And I haven't listened to any of the podcasts in a little while. I just haven't had time to sit down and concentrate. It's one of those things that's a vice of mine is like, or a problem of mine is finding the time to do those things
Mm-hmm.
to add on, right? And
Yeah.
I'll put on the odd podcast at the shop and I'll listen through, but I find I got to listen to it like 8 times before I
Yeah.
can hear everything. It's just that the shop is not
No. It's
a
not
good
conducive for
environment,
that at all.
right? There's just, I will listen and I will try and do that, but like if I'm mindlessly grouting a piece, I can concentrate then, right? Like the
Mm-hmm.
mindless aspects I can, but if I'm building a formwork, I concentrate on what I'm doing. If I'm running the table saw, I shut the podcast off, right? Like
Yeah.
let's just not go there, right? It's those are those aspects, but yeah, it's like but I mean that's the way things work, right? You can learn from everybody too, right? It's not just the super geniuses or whatever. Um,
Well, I sure hope so.
Everybody's got
That
something.
makes this podcast completely worthless if not.
uh, but some of the uh, not in concrete. I mean, I've got a woodworking background and stuff. Uh, Prior to doing all of concrete, I was running a very successful finishing business with my wife, and we did an enormous amount of finishing carpentry in from 2013 to 2017, 2018. We did an enormous amount of projects doing finishing houses. So we would do the window casings, hang doors, do the baseboards, handrails, and that measure of stuff in the house. And the most time saving tip that I ever got in doing what I did came from the slowest carpenter I'd ever met. Um, I learned from him how to hang. So in the Planet, hanging doors, the way that I hang doors, there would be maybe a 0.5% of the entire world population that could hang a door as fast as what I can hang a door currently. Um, it was something. It was a skill set that I developed over thousands and thousands of doors, but I learned how to hang a door that fast from the slowest person I'd ever met on the planet. And I came in and I like, well, like I was watching them and I learned how to do that. And I can hang a door in 2 to 5 minutes. And most of the rest of the world takes 15. And I can do it consistently. But the guy that I learned from, he could hang a door pretty quick and whatever. But the fact of the matter was he was slow because he got in and he would come in and he'd start the workday and then he'd come in at 7 and then he'd have to go for a smoke at 7:30. And then 7:30 he'd come around and 7:35 he'd come back in and then 8 o'clock he'd have to go and he'd have to have a sip of his coffee. Then 8:30 would come around and well that's like 30 minutes away from 9 o'clock. That's pretty close. Well, then he'd have to go to the bathroom because, 9 o'clock's coming. He's not going to go on company time. And then he's got to talk, and have his coffee break at 9. And then 9 o'clock come around. And then, well, if you're going to take 15, you might as well take a half an hour. And that's how his whole day would go. It's like everything was a waste of time, but he could do the things he did quickly when he was working. It's just, but like as far as a work ethic goes, like terrible work ethic. Like it's like, oh, like I learned 1,000 ways to dog fuck for an entire day. Like he would be the master of doing those things, and I don't like working with people like that, because I mean, if you're a part of a team, I'd like the other members of the team to at least pull their weight, and that's not what he was doing. Like, but him and his world and the guy that he worked with, right? They would every day for months and months and months on end, they would come in and they would solve the world's problems, right? They had the answers to how to solve world hunger. They had the answer to solve all the political woes of the world. They had the answer for like how to make traffic circles better. Everything you could think of, they could do, except for how to get the job done on time. That was the one thing they couldn't do. But as far as armchair politics go, I mean, I don't think that they had their peers in anywhere in the company that we work with, right? Like they had every single country in the world. They knew who the political leaders are, why they were failing, what they could have done. But it's like, could you guys get the job done so the rest of us could go home? But yeah, like I said, you can learn from everybody, because like the fastest tip I ever learned was from that guy, but he did nothing else well. Just one thing. He was really good at one thing.
Yeah, I mean, some of the people who just get nothing done, they have to get sometimes they have to get their work done so quick because they've just burned through all the rest of the time. So there are some people who you can really just learn some crazy fast things to do it, because they're like, well, I just burned all my time. I got to get this done so that I don't get fired.
Yeah, and like I said, and he did it. What he did when he worked was flawless. It was always flawless. It just didn't work all the time. He didn't work, and the ridiculous part is, right, like he could have worked 6 hours of the week and taken the rest of the time off. If he would just work 6 hours on a Monday, the rest of the week would be his free. If he would just commit to actually working those 6 hours consecutively, because that's all he put in a work week. I swear, the rest of the time he was either having coffee, having smokes, having a bathroom break, or having lunch. Like there was nothing else. He did nothing else. But it is what it is, right? Like that's the it takes all types to make the world go round.
Yeah, some of the things that I was reading in the productivity books is one of the things that came up over and over again is you'd blow your mind if when you sat down or went into work, when you did nothing but work and focus on that, like you'd be shocked at how much you actually get done. And
that is one of the books, and I'll find the name of the book for you here a little bit later. It is the entire basis of a society. Like Japan runs on that lean building process, or the lean process, right? They figure that at least 50% of your time is wasted, and if you could just harness that, if you could, like in a lean building process, like when they go through in those factories in Japan, right? It's like if the job took 30 minutes today, like can we shave 3 seconds? Can we make it 29 minutes and 57 seconds tomorrow? Then they get down 29 minutes 57 seconds, like can we shave down another 4 seconds? Can we make it 29 minutes and 53 seconds? And they'll start whittling away at that time, and they will make the process, and then 8-10 months down the road, it's like now the process is taking us 12 minutes. It used to take us 30, and they will find all of the wasted steps and do away with them. And I think that is part of why I work the way that I work. It's part of my methodology. Is in the shop, I might waste hours of time, but it's all through the process. Because if you don't know what's not uh, if you don't try different things, you don't know. Um, so for an example, right, like there are certain product lines that you can speed up the process of concrete. You can speed up and you can do things different, right? Um, Having a better mixer is, like
Mm-hmm.
if you were doing everything with a half-inch drill, could you imagine how time consuming that would be if you had to do batch after batch after batch, right? They
Oh,
make
you
bigger
wouldn't even make
mixers,
a month.
right? But they make better products, so you can do things with better products, um, and
Mm-hmm.
then you just kind of slowly whittle those things away, and you become more and more efficient, right? Um, but if you don't try, you don't know whether it's going to be more efficient, and sometimes you got to give it a couple tries to find out, right? Like if you see somebody else that's being successful at it and you're not, or if you see 10 people being successful and you're not, then it's probably you, and you're doing
Mm-hmm.
something fundamentally wrong. So um, getting those shop efficiencies is a big thing as part of how that shop runs, right? So uh, and then that's like what we're talking with about Brent, right? Uh, if you're calm about your approach and whatever, and buckets aren't going flying out the shop door, then you can see how to get the workaround, right? And if you're paying attention to those steps and you're writing down like what was successful, what wasn't, and timing how long it takes to do things, you can start to build on your success of um, whittling that time down, right? Um,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you're paying attention to stuff that you're working on, you can find your biggest pain point. Then the question is, okay, well, if you have something that takes an hour for you to do, well, there's a lot of things that we do where you can whittle that down quite substantially just by upgrading a tool, right? Like
yeah,
what you're talking about,
absolutely.
like with a mixer. Like
Yeah,
if you go from like the Colamix handheld ones, when you go from that to like one of the bigger machines, and that can be doing its thing while you're over here working on this thing, the time savings isn't like a 1+1. It's exponential. Because if you can be
absolutely.
working on something while something else is doing whatever that thing is, oh man, that's where it's at. I mean, assuming you have the shop space for it.
And that's the thing, right? It's that balance. And like we bought our mixer last year, and then now that is a double-edged sword, though. Is you can have the tools, but you have to have the time to experience them to get their benefit. Uh, so I have tools in our shop that will substantially cut down the amount of time that I have to work, but I have to be able to have the time to pour a project from start to finish 3, 4, 5, 10 times, whatever it's going to take, so I know the ins and outs of those tools. Like
Mm-hmm.
I have a very large sprayer, um, and I haven't fired it up a single time because I need to know um, with certainty how the project will finish. So if I've done all my samples and I've done all the work and I've done all the legwork and I've done it all by hand, is using a sprayer, is using another tool, is it going to fundamentally change the end result in a way that is predictable, or am I going to end up having to recast? Because I have to know, uh, is that use of time wise? Like if I, especially with terrazzos, right? Like um, in theory, the smaller pieces I can put through the sprayer. I can, but is it going to put the aggregate closer to there? Am I going to have to change how that works? Is it going to have all the aggregate load up front and then I'm going to have like a creamy on the other side of there? Like I don't know those things without running a test to find
Mm-hmm.
out, right? And I don't have the luxury of time to perform the tests to find out, right? So I have equipment that in theory saves me time, but I don't have the time to test the theory. Um,
Have you reached out to Jason Johnson?
no, I've talked with him briefly about a couple of different projects, but not about the sprayer.
Oh,
Um,
I would say reach out to him about the terrazzo. He
yeah,
may actually know whether you can do that or not.
yeah, yeah.
I would say like I mean, we're obviously over the time that you said you wanted to spend, so I'm not going to ask you about terrazzo, but
Oh,
that's
go ahead. I mean, that's like I have no problems. I mentioned it earlier, like it was once I got back from my errands, I was like, I was able to commit whatever time we needed, right? So, but
I mean, that's up to you. I think the
well,
kids are about to go to bed,
we're barely over
so
time.
things, because that's one thing that I would really like to get into. But you've seen what happens when I get a hold of colors. Can you imagine what happens when I add
Aggregate to
terrazzo?
that. Oh, it'd be
Yeah,
cool. It
yeah,
would
it
be
would be
so
cool.
cool.
But can you imagine if
Yeah.
I get
It,
a hold of it, what's going to happen?
but let's take that. So let's just do a real rough breakdown, right? Let's actually use it on a calculator, right? So you've got 600 possible colors. Pick one. Doesn't matter. So you have, and then let's say you have 10 times. No, let's just do that easier. Let's do 4. Let's say you got a hold of 4 different aggregates, and then even mixing those in equal amounts. So you got 4 times 2 times 1. So you have 24 different combinations of aggregates that you could put together if you just got 4. And then you have
Mm-hmm.
ratios. So, like if you wanted to go 50% of this one and you wanted to do 15 and then 10 and whatever, like percentage of how you wanted to, the amount of combinations, and then you multiply 24 times 600, you're at 14,400 possible combinations of just getting 4 different kinds of rocks, right? So if you went
Mm-hmm.
and picked up 4 bags of rock, you'd be at it for decades, and you wouldn't even scratch the surface of
Mm-hmm.
possibility, right? So it would be and that's only based on if you do no more with color. If you stop at
Mm-hmm.
600, like it would be cool. Um, so yeah, it's a pretty dangerous thing to go down, but at the same time, it opens the possibilities of what can be done for limitlessly. Like, and it is. I think Terrazzo, like that's where creatives that creative process is an important thing because, as you know, right, um, not every color combination is a good one.
Ooh,
There
no.
are thousands of duds, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
thousands of like we did one here. The customer at the customer's request, right? Like it's like they brought me the sample, and I'm like, really? This is the color? Yeah, that's what we had our eyes set on. Like I'm like, where did you get this sample? Well, we got it with this one guy. He brought me the sample, but he's no longer doing it. He's not in the business anymore. But this is the sample out of the ones that he had. That's the one that we picked. I'm like, and you want me to duplicate that? Yeah, that's what we want you to duplicate. I'm like, I tell you what, I'll duplicate that color and I will bring you 4 or 5 samples of my work that are originals. And then you go ahead. If you still want to go with that color, like
Mm-hmm.
I'm all for it, right? And I'm like, so I'm looking at that color and I'm like, I showed it to my wife and I'm like, what does that remind you of? She's like, that is 100% the inside of a little kid's diaper smeared into concrete. I'm like, right? I'm like, those mustardy browns is not anybody's color. I'm like, why am I doing this? Mustardy greeny brown is not a good concrete color. But I'm like, and they're like, why is the customer making you do this? I'm like, I don't know. So I made that mustardy greeny brown diaper crap yellow sample for them, and I made a more taupe, earthy sand tone color, which was
Mm-hmm.
what they ultimately picked. They wanted a natural color, but that was like it was a natural color, but just not natural to concrete, not natural in any other form that was useful, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
like, but that was the best color that the other guy had to offer, and I was like,
Mm-hmm.
whoa. I'm like, and they're like, oh, we had no idea that we could have what we wanted in a different color. We were afraid to ask. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
it's like, it's like, because the other guy sold it as like, these colors are very difficult to make. I'm like, yeah, it was hard for me to make that color too. Like,
I believe him.
it was like,
Yeah.
I really had to swallow my pride to make that color for you, but it's what it is. But yeah, not everything is a success. And Terrazzo would be no exception, right? You can definitely have some duds in there, but there's so many more cool options that you can do, right?
Yeah, well,
I
the main reason is space right now. Once we get to where like we move out into a bigger shop space, then I'll probably start doing the terrazzo because like it opens up my color options more because like you can take a really bright, vibrant color like a nice peach or a nice orange or a purple, and then you
mhm.
can pair it with marble chunks, and that tones that very bright, vibrant color way down, but it's still fun and exciting and unique because, face it, most shops don't even have those color codes. But having the large aggregates makes it more palatable to more people.
For you, with the color combinations that you have, I would suggest to you to start with plate glass, plain clear glass, not adding any colors to it, just straight glass.
Hmm.
Because the way that it works very nicely in concrete is you could have a very vivid uh, cream color, but the second you polish it, your sand appears and it mutes that color, but your vibrancy would still show through the glass. So you'd have like a tone on tone, which is really cool, especially with some of those, like with an orange, for example, like going back to the very beginning. Those
Hmm.
oranges, as soon as you take the cream off, the vibrancy disappears because the sand takes over or whatever the base takes over. So
Hmm.
but they would stay through. On the glass side, it would stay that same level of sheen as what like was originally there, and it makes a really cool tone on tone um,
Yeah, see, our
without
sand
changing a
here
whole
is
lot.
quite tan, so that has a pretty hefty influence on the color too.
Yeah, but that it shows through the glass because the glass on
Hmm.
the other side of the glass is a very cream color. So when you put a sealer on it, it brings that enhancement back and it shows through. Your colors show through on the other side, but the whatever's been polished away the other way on the sand side. So you get that very nice tone on tone, and you end up with something that's pretty cool in my opinion, right? Like some of our nicer pieces that we've done um, is with safety glass or whatever because it does. But with you've got such a bigger variety of colors available to you than what I've played with. I think it really cool to see what kind of shows up, and it's not from a cost perspective, right? Like go down to a glass shop, buy a chunk of tempered glass, and smash it with a hammer. You'll end up with a bucket full, and it's easy to work with,
Hmm.
uh, and doesn't take up a whole lot of space, right? Like one gallon bucket of glass is something you can try pretty easily without having to break the bank, right? It's
Hmm.
basically the shop's garbage, right? Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean that's where I would start if I was in your shoes, like and limit on space because you one thing would open up thousands of possibilities.
Yeah, if somebody was going to get into terrazzo, what how would you even recommend somebody start down that road? I know
To
that's a pretty
start,
open-ended question, but I mean, because everybody you have to start somewhere, right?
for me, the way that I ended up going down that rabbit hole was I started the business uh, using a brute force method. I opened up the whatever was left of the phone books and I went through and I found all the designers on there. I went through Instagram, I went through Facebook, I went through all the social medias I could think. I went through Twitter and I found every single designer that I could. And then I reached out to them one at a time and I phoned everyone and I talked to them in person, as many of them as I could. And I still do that on a regular. But time and time and time again, they would be like, we were over at this place and I got this picture of this terrazzo floor over at this hotel over here. Can you
Mm-hmm.
make that? And I was going through and it's like, and as the idiot that I am, yeah, I can do that. I can try, or I can do something similar. And then I was like, the next thing is like, I'm ordering rock, I'm ordering whatever. And it snowballed way faster than I expected it to. And it's like I opened up my mouth and I created my own monster of things, right? So because terrazzo is one of the more uh, time-consuming looks to do. You need to
Mm-hmm.
polish up to a point where you've got to grind away enough of the surface that it exposes that rock to an appealing amount, right? Like you can create a terrazzo look by polishing with a 200 grit sand pad and just have just a little bit of grain showing through of the terrazzo look, and you can stop there. But as you go on, you can end up with like a full coverage, and it's like where you stop is subjective to what you want to have look at the end of it. Like you can start with the same aggregate, and depending on where you stop, you'll have 3 different or 4 or 5 different looks of finish. If you
Mm-hmm.
grind it, the deeper you grind, the more larger the terrazzo pieces become. So where I would start is start with the cheapest media that you can start with and play around with it, because like you can I think in my shop we've probably got close to 30 different types of terrazzo chips, which is an enormous amount of terrazzo chips, but it's because our customers have demanded of us to try and create these different looks that I've had to buy them, right? So it's a very, very space heavy kind of thing, but you can limit that. Like I said, like glass is a nice one because it's easy to get without having to pay any import fees or shipping fees. Like you can literally just go down to any glass shop and go, do you have any tempered glass that's been discarded, or look on Craigslist or look on Marketplace and just find a piece of tempered glass and hit it with a hammer, and you literally just start with a bag of terrazzo chips that you can work with, or go down to Home Depot or Lowe's and buy pea gravel and start with that, because pea gravels in different colors look really cool too. Not all. I mean, like pea gravel it's a natural, so I mean if you use vibrant colors in pea gravel, it does look weird. I mean, for somebody that might be the coolest thing they've ever seen, right? But yeah, that's how I would start. Is I would start off with the cheapest material available, and then experiment. Then you can decide if the labor involved is worth the time that you're going to put into it, right? So time, how long it takes to do a regular piece, then time how long it takes to do a terrazzo piece, and then determine what you want to make per hour, or whatever the case is, and then you'll have an idea whether it's worth it to go down that rabbit hole. Because if you go, say the average piece takes you 15 hours to do a top, and you find it's 25 hours, and you need to donate 10 more hours to the shop space or whatever, are you making your money back on your space that you have? Because you're limited in space, right? So can you afford that extra 10 hours? Like, can you justify a 50% wage hike or a price hike, and will the people pay for it to justify that? Do you have the tools to do that? Like, I'm assuming you probably have. I don't know. Do you have bigger polishers, or do you have small polishers? Or
no, the only thing I have is the Alpha, the single head.
So you can, right? Like you can do it with a single head, but it's a lot of work, right? Like to keep a piece flat with terrazzo with a 5-inch disc is a lot of work.
Yeah. See, I'm pretty confident that I will. I even bought some aggregates, and it's actually sitting behind a whole bunch of stuff so I can't get to it. Like, I know that as soon as I start, there's no stopping me, because like I've already got color combinations and aggregate combinations in my head, and I know that if I start, it's going to take me away from these other things that I'm working on right now. So I've kind of put several gates in front of me that I need to progress through those, kind of like an RPG. I have to level up to a certain level before I'm even considering doing that.
Well, like I mentioned, right? You've got 600 colors, and if you have 4 different types of aggregate, that's 14,400 possible combinations out of the gates. Yeah, that's a lot of options. Like a lot of options. And
See, but
that's with
that kind
only
of stuff
four.
makes I love that.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, concrete in itself, right? It's like the infinite possibilities of what you can do
Hmm.
is cool. And like you said, there's a little bit of mimicking other guys and whatnot, um, and their styles and doing whatever. But that's what makes it worthwhile, right? The industry is big enough to support all types.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, everybody just makes gray rectangles.
I haven't done. No, I think this year alone, I think we've done two tops that were just gray rectangles. Like
See, that's awesome.
everything else has been variations. I mean, we did way more terrazzo than I ever thought we were going to. Um,
Hmm.
we did a lot and I think that the artistic side of stuff is like we did sort of a gray rectangle. We did a shop here, not a shop, a coffee house. What they wanted is they wanted that industrial look that concrete can bring to the table, but what they
Hmm.
wanted was very specifically um, sections of their countertop to look like that coffee shop had been there for years. So
Hmm.
what we did was we exposed areas. So we had in their beside their garbage can, they had a garbage can that's like one of those uh, uh, countertops that the hole in the top for the garbage to slide into.
Hmm.
So what I did was I exposed and I added aggregate so I could do a terrazzo, but I exposed far more aggregate on the right side of the garbage can than on the left side, so that it looks like people had slid garbage in from the right for
Hmm.
years, right? And there's a little bit more on like a little less on the left, right? But to balance that out, over by their uh, where they slide the coffee cups across the table, I made it way more wore out, so it looked like tens of thousands of coffee cups got slid over. So there's the artistic side of where would the wear happen in this
Hmm.
coffee shop? Where are people going to lean? What's going to be the focal point? Like where are they going to slide stuff? Where's the register? Where's the change handed over? Where are the plates slid across when the customers come? Where's the wait? All those things. We thought about all of that, and I worked it out with we worked the workflow into the piece of how that workflow was going to look, so that those pieces would age, and that's where the terrazzo showed up in that gray piece. Like it's just pea gravel that's showing up, but like we wore the concrete out in the spots that's if that business was open for 70 years, that's where the countertop would wear out, and we exposed it in that way.
So did you end up making it look like that with just the changes in the aggregate and the whole countertop was still flat, or did it end up being a little bit wavy in some of those areas?
In some, it was almost dead flat
Hmm.
when I was done polishing it, because what I did was I did a combination of a spray up and a combination of hand packing the areas that I wanted in heavier terrazzo, because I
Hmm.
couldn't spray the terrazzo. So I polished everything to be mostly flat, but in certain areas, like the corners, like I could see that the way the flow was in the building. Um, if you were going to come, like there's certain places, like if you go to um, places like any coffee shops, or whatever, people tend to lean on certain areas,
Hmm.
and those areas where I could see people leaning, like putting their elbows down and waiting for people, I made those areas intentionally wore down so that they weren't dead flat. So I ground more out of those to make those areas in particular wore out, so that it's like,
Hmm.
okay, yeah, no, yeah, this is where like when people come in, like everybody walks by this one corner, and I round it out so like essentially it's a big rectangle, but on beside the doorway, I rounded that corner out, and the other side on the opposite corner where people like don't walk is square. So one side's
Hmm.
rounded out on purpose, and I made the other side square because it's like, no, that's how you'd walk through. Like people are gonna walk through, they're gonna lean, they're gonna take their shoe off and dump the rocks out if they were walking or wherever. Right? Like it's like, oh, that's where they're gonna walk around the corner, but or like those kind of things, right? Like we intentionally did it that way to wear those out, or to make it look that way, right? So uh,
Mm-hmm.
we put the thought into how the flow of business was for that particular customer. But like I said, that's where at least art meets function, right? It's an artistic
Yes.
representation of what I think flow would be 20 years from now, and we built it in
Yeah.
advance,
Yeah. Yeah. We sped time up.
right? So
Uh, well, I mean, is there anything else that you want to talk about? I mean, I've got a whole list of things that we'll just have to save for next time because we didn't even really get to the main things that we put in the checklist to talk about. But I still think it was good. I
yeah,
prefer these over.
organic.
Uh, yeah. Uh, I need to get better at like actually asking the questions that. And then you look down, it's like 2 hours later, and you're like, "Huh, forgot to ask all these different things."
Well, I think one of
Um,
the things we were going to talk about was burnout, right? I think that was like,
yeah.
because that's one of those things every shop struggles with, right? Is that burnout phase, and then how people deal with it. I don't know how people deal with it either, right? Like, but I know that was one of the things that, like, that's where I'm at right now. Is 8 consecutive months is far too long, right? But you can't. I described it to somebody else. It's like those marathon runners you see on TV, right? Like, they've
Mm-hmm.
only got 200 feet to the finish line, right? But they're stumbling over their own feet, and they're,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't matter that they can see the finish line. There's no more in the tank to get there, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's the kind of burnout like I'm at right now. It's like it's only 2 more days, but it's a long 2 more days to get to it, and then a day's recharge isn't going to be enough. It's like those kind of things. But I'd be interested to see how other people handle it down the road. So I'll keep in mind, like, when I listen to your podcast in the future, if you talk with anybody else, how they handle it, because it's
Yeah. Brent and Caleb both talk about it.
yeah,
They both have ways of avoiding that.
yeah, yeah,
Um, I just from what I've heard from them and what I've read is you'll have to give up some of those meeting those deadlines.
yeah. That's a part of it for sure. In that respect, I wasn't willing to do that this year at all.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that has to do with the fact that, we're at the end of 2 years of this COVID nonsense that, is
Yeah.
still on the minds of everybody, and that that real possibility that come September, when school starts up again and whatever, that some of those government agencies may decide to re-implement measures again, because
Mm-hmm.
at least in our area, they haven't given up the torch on that. They still haven't put down that or put that to rest. Like, you're lucky. You're in Florida, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So you have a
Things have
governor
been
over
normal
there.
here for a long time.
Yeah, you have a governor there with a set of balls on him, like, that's bigger than the country, because, like, he's told
Mm-hmm.
everybody else off, right? Because you come, like, if you were to California, that's still a shit show, right? Like,
Yep.
or Oregon or anything out on the West Coast, right? Like, that's the way that. But I mean, that's the way the country is, right? So
Mm-hmm.
um, I'm glad you guys have somebody that was willing to say, no, this wasn't working. We can give it up. Our current leaders haven't put that to rest yet. So it's like, if I give it up and I stop and they decide to shut it down, I do myself no favors. Uh, so until that point, until I know that there's some type of normalcy, then I got to
Mm-hmm.
work against it, or work, like, whatever they say, make hay while the sun shines, because you never know.
Yeah, get all you can get while the getting's good, because the getting won't always be good.
That's right. So for the
Mm-hmm.
like, that's the only reason I haven't given up on those deadlines, because I know that the other guys are hungry, right? Like, if I can't meet those deadlines, there's somebody out there that will, right? For the time being.
Possibly, yeah. Yeah. But then you end up in a situation what you're in right now.
Well, yeah, because I'm the
Yeah.
guy, right? Like, I'm the guy that they phone
Mm-hmm.
when the impossible is there, right? Like, like I said, the superhero complex. Like, I'm the guy that
Mm-hmm.
gets the phone call when the impossible needs to get done. And we've had a few of those. Um, and we always manage. We always seem to get them done, but it comes at a cost, right? Like anything else.
Yeah. Well, I'm hoping that I can find some solutions, or you can kind of glean something from some of the other guys, or that might jive with your personality. Because, like, we've even got some newer people coming into the industry, and they're just like, I just, I don't see how y'all do it. And I know that there are answers and solutions out there. They just got to find them. And hopefully I can do that for people.
Well, I think
So,
if you were going to talk with another, like we don't have time in this podcast, but if you're talking on another podcast with somebody else, I think the big key for success in this industry is don't worry about the boneyard. Like, don't. Like, you're
yeah.
going to screw up. There's not one person worth his salt in this industry that hasn't put something in the boneyard. Every last one of us has had some fail of some sort to an epic proportion, right? Like, I remember last year, Martin posted um, that big pedestal base that's like close to a metric ton of concrete that's screwed up on him, right? I'm like, that was like a monster amount. And like, there's arguably fewer people that have as much experience on the spray gun and stuff that he does and have that
Mm-hmm.
fail on him and have him to recast it. And he did everything right. He did absolutely everything right. And he still ended up with a failure that he had to recast, or that was in a way that he felt that he needed to recast. Because there's others that have been like, that's concrete, I'm going to let it slide. But the difference between Martin and those guys is Martin has a set of standards that he's not willing to compromise. And I like, that's, we have the same, right? Like, if it's not to my standard, it doesn't go to this, it doesn't go to the site. Um, and
Yeah. I mean,
that's the thing.
yeah, I think the phrase concrete's going to do what concrete's going to do has been
A cop out.
abused. Because there is, it's one of those things where there is some truth to it, right?
Yeah.
And, but when you're using it as an excuse for something uh, going wrong that shouldn't have gone wrong, that's when you've crossed over.
Yeah. Yeah. That's one thing that I found recently, at least in the last 3 months, and maybe you've found it the same. I have found that there is quality differences in the bags of Rapid Set that I've seen.
Yeah,
Uh,
somebody was talking about that just the other day, of make sure, like, if you're a rapid set shop, make sure that you weigh every single bag.
yeah, I've had as low as 50 pounds and as high as 60. That's a 10
Mm-hmm.
pound variance. And that, I mean, if you're talking about percentage of water weight or whatever, and
Or
I mean,
pigment.
I don't, or pigment, no, it's huge, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
undeniable difference
Yeah.
in the way that it turns out, right? And I found that the content of the proportions of what's in the bag hasn't been purely consistent. I have
Mm-hmm.
had I have had bags that the entire bag has almost been black, and I've had very little CSA, and I've had where the entire bag is just about all CSA and very little sand. Um, so we've seen those big variations, and I try and do, when I do the rapid set projects, I try and do them all out of the same dye lot as close as I
Yeah.
can, right? So if I've got to use 30 bags on a project, I will go and get 30 bags, and I will make sure they're all from the same batch, and then
Yeah.
um, I will not start that project without bringing a sample to the customer, even if they picked one out. Like, they might have had a sample that had handed out to an architect or designer 7 months ago. It's like, no. This is what it looks like out of today's
Mm-hmm.
blend, because I find that pigment load may act different. Or, yeah, I guess pigment from 6 months ago till now may act different if it's not in the same dye lot, right? Like, it's certain colors. I find that's a big deal. I have that with red oxide. That's my Achilles heel. Like, we've had a lot with the red oxide, and 2 grams on a 55-pound bag is enough to change everything. in a bad way.
Yeah, interesting times.
And that's, I guess, exactly why. I mean, that's why we're starting to go down more the Portland road a lot more, is controlling consistency. Not that Rapid Set isn't, but it's made for a different industry. If I was doing like the purple bag Rapid Set instead of a Smantol or something like that, like I'd say it's 50-50. But you know, if you're controlling what's in there, it's different. But the bag weights is a big one.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what Jake Brady does. I'm pretty sure he uses purple bag.
Yeah.
And then adds his own aggregates. I was supposed to do an episode with him today, but we had to reschedule. But I plan on, that's something that we'll end up talking about. Because I think he's primarily a Rapid Set shop.
Yeah, if not, well, unless he needs white. Unless he needs a white, then he's a Portland. And even then, it's kind of like whatever. I would say that our shop is 60-40 split. I think it's and then that's depending on the month. Some months it's 60-40 Rapid Set. Some months it's 60-40 Portland. It all depends on what's going on. I find I don't have any success with Terrazzos using Rapid Set because I need to control the sand content more in a terrazzo, and we have way too much terrazzo going out to control it any other way. But unless I went with
well, if you switch to purple bag, you might be able to do that.
Yeah, but then but I'd have to really unless I was doing like a dark color terrazzo, like a black or whatever. But most terrazzos, most of the customers we've wanted have wanted the light or pastel colors, right? They haven't wanted a dark. So, but black on black terrazzo is kind of cool, right? And if I was doing a black on black or whatever, then I could see me using the purple bag then.
So many choices, so many fun things to make.
too many fun choices. The problem is I also give my designers free reign, so the number of things that I have to make samples for because of that is huge.
How do you charge for that?
It depends on the project. Sometimes I build it into the cost of the project from the onset. So I will, like if it's a $30,000 project and I'm going to be at it for days and days, I'll give them 4 or 5 different samples to get it right. And I won't worry about it. In the grand scheme of things, if it's a 5-figure payday, I'm willing to put in a little extra legwork, especially on some of the bigger clients. Like if I know that they're going to be a repeat client and they're going to spend 5 figures or 6 figures with me a year, then I don't worry about it. If it's a customer, it's like wishy-washy, then we'll start charging. I haven't figured that out, but I'm going to probably start charging $100 a sample after 2 or maybe 3. If the customer is just too hard to please, then I just got to draw a line in the sand. But a lot of them I find are going to sites that we've already done something because I've got enough commercial sites out there. It's like, we want that, but with these rock chips. And I just match to whatever they want. And it's been pretty fortunate that way.
Okay, yeah, because things can get a little dicey. Like if you're making a bigger sample so they can kind of see what it looks like, you can have quite a bit of time in just making a sample.
I'm either extremely good at or extremely fortunate at reading what my customers want, that I found that I haven't had to go much beyond 2 or 3 samples. There's been the odd one that we've had to do more than that, but I mean, usually what I do is if I give a customer 3 samples, they pick one almost all the time. If you give them 10 samples, that's too many.
Well, when you say sample, what does that mean? Like, what does that look like? Is it, are you doing a bigger square and you've cut it into smaller squares? Is it just like a real small square that you've just poured whatever that mixture of things is in, and you just grind it and say, hey, this is what it looks like? Like,
No,
how involved is a sample for you?
most of my samples are probably 16 by 16.
Okay, me too.
So, and then most of those samples, and it's always full sealer. I don't go with like a raw piece. Like I always seal them so that
Mm-hmm.
they're all so that basically it's a real representation of what's there. I I will occasionally, if not always, leave my samples somewhat rough. Um, I never make a perfect sample. There will be a flaw known to me on the sample,
Mm-hmm.
and it could be as simple as I might have a swirl mark on where when I was polishing it out. Like I might not have removed the swirl mark, or a pinner. I might have one pinner in there, or something like that, like one
Mm-hmm.
little bug hole, and I won't finish that perfectly. I never finish a sample 100% perfect, uh, and then I'll point it out to the customer sometimes, or I won't, depending on what the customer is. But I never make it 100% perfect, because on a 100 square foot project, the odds of me missing something, it can happen. I'm not infallible, so I might have a flaw in there somewhere. But if the flaw was in my sample, or if I have a flaw intentionally left in my sample, and the customer was okay with it, then it's like, okay, yeah, you know what, I did see that in your sample. Or if I could point it out, it's like, no, it's stuff that is there, that if I miss it, because I've had that before, where a swirl mark has shown up that I didn't see in wet processing, but it shows up in sealer,
Mm-hmm.
depending on the finish. It's like, sometimes it bothers me more than it bothers anybody else, because I see it, because I'm up close with the piece, but I don't see it until the very end. Um,
Mm-hmm.
or I might have a bug hole show up like right the last minute on a spot that, I'll be working on it, and it shows up on the side that was on the dark side of my shop, or whatever, where I didn't have
Mm-hmm.
lighting, wasn't as good. And usually that happens on a piece that it's drying out, and that it was just full of water or something, that I just missed it by
Mm-hmm.
not seeing it or whatever. Um, but if it's not a perfect sample, then uh, I know we talked about, like, it's an excuse because concrete does what concrete does, but that's more to leave me an out. If because like, if the customer's like, oh, like there's a this or whatever, it's like, yes, it's that's a me thing, not a concrete thing. That's a something we missed. But I've never had anybody ever say anything about it. I just know that if you produce perfect, then uh, perfection is what they expect on the whole scale of thing, and it may
Mm-hmm.
be impossible to achieve, especially on terrazzos. Sometimes you might end up with, mixing things, everything. You should have a random pattern and it should work out. But you could end up with the big spot of all white and black separated out naturally. It could just happen. I mean, it's odd, but I've seen it
Mm-hmm.
happen where we have like far more green rocks in this one spot than anywhere else. And it's like, well, no, that's kind of how they mixed up, because when they're all covered in concrete paste, I have no idea what color those rocks are
Yeah.
until I polish them. Like, I have no idea, right? I've mixed them thoroughly in the bucket, but sometimes that's the way that Mother Nature puts them back together. And that is an instance of concrete's going to do what concrete's going to do. It's like, I've
Mm-hmm.
mixed it thoroughly. Mother Nature put them all back together. Um, it doesn't happen often, but I've seen it. Where have more small rocks and fewer big rocks, or whatever the case is. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and the other reason is, um, I've never made perfect pieces, is because I want to show that they are handmade. It's like when I bring it to the customer, it's like, you made this for us, right? Like, this is our sample. This is for our house. This is for whatever
Mm-hmm.
we're doing. And yeah, like I don't finish the sides. I don't finish the back. I make sure the top is finished. unless it's got a profile that I have to show for the side. Then I might finish like if we've got to do a rock chip face, or I've got to do something that's unique to the side, I'll do a side for a sample. But I never make it 100% perfect so that the customer can see like this is a process, right? It's not just something that uh, uh, you could just go down to Home Depot and pick it out of the sample pile, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
these were one offs for that
It's not
purpose.
quartz.
It's not quartz, exactly. So
Hmm.
I think that leaving those flaws is important to it. Like, and they're always like they're never big ones, and sometimes it's like, and usually I kind of make sure that the field is pretty much uniform. I never leave a big problem right in the middle. Like I don't leave a thumb size uh, problem right in the middle of it. Right? It's like
A sealer stripe right down the middle.
yeah, exactly. Everything. Most of that is it's always minor, but enough to show that it's because I find that that's what the customers were looking for. They weren't looking for plastic. They weren't looking for whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Do you, so outside of Terrazzo, do you spray or SCC?
yes. the
Well, the
last,
reason I ask is because, like, if you make a 16 by 16 sample to get everything together to spray just a 16 by 16 like that drastically increases the time for a sample like that. That's
yeah.
the main reason I ask. Because an SCC of that size is going to look well, depending on your spray style, is going to look night and day different. You know what I mean?
Oh, it is, and then the last sample I made for the job I just installed yesterday. We just finished up doing this all in order. Like I did a spray sample, and I did a 16 by 16, and then I talked to the customer like, listen, before I go on to doing your entire house, which was like it was just a little over it was a little over 120 square feet of concrete. I said before we go full whole hog and we go down and I get everything done, I said I did a 16 by 16, but I said I don't think that's a big enough sample size for you to get a feel of what's going to go on, and I want a larger sample size that's going to be more representative of like when I'm going to spray out 100 square feet at a time. I need to know how it's going to react because in a timeline when you're doing that, like I find that sometimes I'm a little bit more impatient with the sample. I don't
Mm-hmm.
dedicate as much time as like not dedicate as like in a 16 by 16 sample, you can be done in minutes. On a big square top, there's more time for things to dry. There's more time for things to move. There's more things that can happen within that. So I made a 30 by 30 sample for them on the job because I mean the job was it was expensive enough that it warranted doing a larger sample for the customer to see, and we made and I just turned that sample into a coffee table. I just made it a finished piece that I can put on as a coffee table after. But I did the larger piece and the spray up, and then that way the customer could see more. And then it turned out um, the finish actually turned out night and day different on that larger sample because I had more time
Mm-hmm.
on the piece. Right, the spray pattern changed over that larger piece, and it was actually better because it was far nicer for the customer in the end to see that bigger piece because not enough of the character showed up on the 16 by 16 where it did on the 30 by 30 because you're talking almost four times the size, right? Like it's a
Mm-hmm.
it's a bigger sample and it's the only way to show it in what we were doing.
Yeah, see, I have enough experience with that. That's probably good for probably a newer person or somebody who's maybe a little bit more impatient. Where if you know that you're like those are your proclivities, you should make a bigger sample, right? Because you can always take that big sample and cut it down into small pieces and then just give the smaller ones to designers.
Yeah,
Um, I'm very proficient with doing that style and the 16 by 16, but I'm very patient.
Like I'll hang the hopper gun up, I'll clean the tip off, I'll leave it sitting over there. I'll go do something else and kind of muddle around the shop, clean out a bucket or something like that, and then come back and spray a little bit more, then go kind of do something else, then come back and spray. So, but like, yeah, I'm very patient with it. So if you're not patient, do it like what you're talking about. It's probably a safer
Well,
way to
yeah,
do it
yeah,
because
and
they'll turn
it's
out so different.
oh, it was night and day. Both
Mm-hmm.
samples were good in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I found that when we were done, like the second sample turned out far superior to the first, and I mean, it was just because I had more surface area to work
Mm-hmm.
with to get that. Because I mean that's the way that the look was, right? The look needed to be spread out, so it was like on a whole you needed to see a larger piece. Like I think even if I cut that down into a 6x6 tile to hand out, I
Oh
don't
yeah, you
think
wouldn't be able to see.
you would miss everything, right? And that was the
Mm-hmm.
point, is to get that, because I think that it was important with this particular client to show them the larger piece, because we were doing I think their island was 55 by 111, so it was a very large surface top that, other than the sink, that the whole top was that one style of look. So I wanted to show them the larger
Mm-hmm.
picture, because a 16 by 16 didn't show it. But yeah, it's all uh, I don't know. I don't like handing out um, a whole bunch of 6x6 tiles to the designers and whatnot. I like the designers that we work with the most asks uh, for more unique things. They come to us because we're willing to work with them. If they wanted a cookie cutter or a box, like whatever, they wanted to get the quartz samples, then they can go to the quartz and whatever guys. But if they want us to work with a unique look for their customer, they're willing to spend the money for us to do that. So we charge a little higher than on those jobs, right? So instead of XYZ, I might charge ZYX on that project. So the project is more money to start off with, um, but because we're going to do a completely custom job, then we just start with custom prices.
Yeah, I think we should probably stop there.
Yeah.
Thanks for everyone who made it all the way to the end of this long episode. If you enjoyed this episode, leaving a review or a comment on whatever platform you're particularly using would be incredibly helpful. Whether it's good or bad, it helps me improve the channel. I really appreciate your time if you go through and do that. And as usual, the thumbs up, the likes, the subscribes, and all the other good social stuff really helps this channel get discovered. Because this podcast is not sponsored in any way, if we did mention something that was helpful to you, if you use one of the affiliate links, it would help considerably support this channel. It's a no-cost solution for you to help support us keep making these videos. Thanks again, and I hope to see you in the next episode.